Hello. Hi, Doof. Hi, Wizard Jim. You didn't actually say hi. You just complained about us being late, but fair enough. Um, yeah, welcome to what is it's a great anniversary. It's episode 5, the most important episode of most shows. Episode 5 of uh, me and Prince chatting about D&D, kind of role playing games in general, but I guess really D&D because do people play other role playing games? Really? Uh, they play Shadow Dark, don't they?
Um, well, yeah, I don't know. I think we talked about that before. That I had a pretty good stint of
Mm.
Dark Heresy during my college days,
Yeah.
and we would occasionally try. I think there were World of Darkness games. I think I've played Magic the Gathering. No, Mage the
Yeah.
Awakening.
Mage the Awakening. Yeah.
I think I've
Oh,
played that once. Yeah.
in the chat, could people offer a commentary, a view on how crackly my mic is out of a 9 out of 10? Is it 9 out of 10? Is it 7 out of 10? Yeah, I mean, I've played plenty of World of Darkness, Exalted, Deadlands, Star Wars D6 actually, which is one of the most legit non D&D games, I think. L5R, Legend of the Five Rings.
Really?
Uh, yeah, yeah. The fourth edition, which is the main one I've played, has really quite fun combat mechanics, but it is like that. Everything else is classic trad gamey roll to resolve social combat, that sort of thing. Okay, thanks, Doof. Doof gives an 8. Grutzy gives a 5. Is this like so? Jim is saying it's 6 out of 10 for crackling. Grutzy is saying it's 5 to 6 out of 10. Is that like quality or lack of quality? I should define this.
It's
Anyway,
probably
fine.
how much of the crackling there could be. Like based,
I think so.
10
Yeah.
out of 10 would be completely inaudible. This is like
Yeah.
you're standing in a windstorm.
Okay. What I will do. What's going on there? My camera has decided to freeze. I think for me. Can you see my camera? Is my camera live for you?
I can absolutely see you. Oh yeah,
Yep.
some technical difficulties.
Yeah, yeah.
I would cut this out. That's fine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll cut this out in post. What I'll do, how about if it's probably a hardware mic thing, is I will switch my mic round. Okay?
That would be
I'll be back
desirable.
in a
Yeah.
minute.
All right then. Oh jeez. Oh, that was pretty scary, wasn't it, chat? Don't worry. That mean old man is gone now. We can talk about anything we want. Mage the Ascension. I have never played it. What makes it less fake than Mage the Awakening, which was also pretty fake. Also pretty fantasy adventure gamey. That's right. Yeah. Oh geez. Legend of the Five Rings. We never quite got to those. I believe I have played all of one session of Dungeon World as well. And there was a guy he wanted to get into RPGs, and there was one he just started with the first thing that he was exposed to. It was the best thing ever. It was Dungeon World. So we ended up playing 2 sessions of that. Um, it was it was not very good. I'm trying to think what else. A lot of Stars Without Numbers. Pretty long campaign. 2 successive ones actually. Must have been 3 or 4 years, and then after that we got started with Axe. The story gaming stream. I've I haven't actually played very many story games. I think Dungeon World was about the closest I ever got to it. The thing with Dungeon World is that it is a story game, and it's a story game meant to give you the sort of the impression that you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, right? It looks like a dungeon crawling game, um, but it doesn't have any sort of like turn structure. All the abilities are kind of like simple, so it operates completely differently. but it's sort of like a dungeon crawling game for people that normally would not be interested in the resource management or all the other complex stuff. I got rid of Owen. This is my stream now. Oh, guys, he's back. Don't say anything. All right, this will be our secret. If anyone ixnay, okay, what we discussed. Welcome back, Owen. All sorts of technical difficulties. Well, we live and we learn. Can you say something so we can see if you are alive? Not so. Anyway, L5R. I heard that L5R, Legend of the Five Rings, that they went sort of at some point you had the World of Darkness meta plot, which was already just a brutal scheme to get you to, or scam to get you to buy all of the supplements.
more
But then
books.
L5R goes even farther. It just sort of embraces it dives, head first into the meta plot.
How's my voice now?
It's less crackly.
Better? Yeah. It's worse, but it's less crackly. Your voice is more disgusting than ever.
That's an unfortunate side effect. I'll have to live with that.
Yeah. Chat. How is my my sound? Better.
How dare you? I've already answered. That should be enough. You don't trust me? You bring me on this show to discuss campaigns. You won't even take my word for it. This is an outrage.
Yeah. Well, Gritzy says it's better, which is the only opinion I need. Germans, the Dutch are just the fake Germans, so I'll go for the real Germans any day.
Oh, well, excellent. Now at least we know where we stand.
Yeah.
All right then.
What's that that Norm bit from Letterman's last show where he's like,
I have no idea what kind of crazy English nonsense you're talking about.
Well, I mean, Norm Macdonald was Canadian and David Letterman's American. This is the Anglo world, and you live in it. Yeah,
I live in a bubble. That's where I live.
Yeah. Mark Rutte has, in fact, put all
I live in a basement.
delinquents in bubbles.
A pit. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, so we were talking about campaigns. We talked a bit about we kind of started on what other games we played. I have run campaigns of other games. I think here's an opening thesis, having run many games, many campaigns, and I hope I'd be better at running other games and their campaigns now. I've got a lot more experience running D&D, but very few games look like they have anything like as robust a game in terms of the campaign as Dungeons and Dragons. Like I haven't played Traveller, but I'm probably going to play it fairly soon. But when I read that, I can see there's a campaign there. But with lots of things, there's a degree of we kind of assume you're stringing together modules, and not very good modules either, into just people. Like you go from place to place. You only go from place to place based on the DM saying, and today you must attack the Imperial base. Like it's we'd call it in our very sheltered circles, trad gaming rather than classic gaming. Obviously, trad sounds like it's very old, but what we mean is that kind of very linear gaming that is just the DM says what the mission is. I think most games seem to come off that, really.
Yes, where you treat it as less of an open world than a series of scenes that are strung together. By the way, that was during that same era. Adventures were not very popular at all. But
no.
That's about right. And there's probably so one of the longest campaigns I ever ran was Dark Heresy, right, which lasted for however long it lasted to take him from 0 XP all the way up to max level, with about 300 XP on average per session. But the point was, you could probably still, at least I did it that way. You can still make it so that they would have choices, right? Or their actions would influence, what the next session was going to look like. It's not completely set in stone, but yes, in general, the assumed model is that you have a series of essentially scenes or a railroad plot or something like that, with varying degrees of freedom versus the better sandbox mode.
Yeah, the better version of those games is one where player choices have an impact on what happens next and the kind of things that might happen. Players might be able to say, I guess, if you're trying to people are attacking our werewolf cairn, maybe we'll get some allies, and there could be some agency there, you can imagine, but it's very much reactive agency. The DM has said there's stuff that has to happen, and you can kind of work within Like maybe there's some choices there. Doof says, I wish other games were good out of the box. I think that's that's kind of the point, is that some of these things are sandboxable, but you have to spend time thinking about what sandboxable means. We're going to get onto, I guess, defining these terms, but by that I really mean player-driven choices. There's choices out in the world. Players can go and do stuff.
I mean,
of their own accord.
this is actually like I sense this entirely parallel sort of episode that we could do about. I think this would have been in World of Darkness or whatever, but they proposed this structure, right? That when they describe a setting source book, it's just like it's this huge, complicated web of NPCs, all with like secrets and relationships towards each other. So presumably, if you would work with something like that, then even if you use a more narrative style, you can still have something that's like relatively open. We're not here to talk about that today, Owen.
No,
we're here to talk about old school D&D campaigns.
No, I thought we were playing just story games from now on. That has been said in the chat. This is the story game stream.
Well, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean that's what. But I think it's useful to define what we're not talking about. I do think that's useful. I think to say, like, look, we are there are games that might even be quite good games, and I say that having hopefully run some of those that are okay, where there is some player choice, but where really the DM or GM or whatever says, look, these are the things we're going to do today. These are your choices within that context.
Whereas in classic most D&D campaigns, there's 2 dungeons they can go to, or even 3. Yeah, exactly.
Well, one thing is that plenty of D&D games are like that. Plenty of D&D games are what we are in our very myopic and local parochial way calling trad. Like, they are very linear, very like, now there is the next bit of the story to discover. And some players seem to really love that, I think they say. But we're not talking about that either. We're talking about a particular kind of D&D campaign, which is what, whenever I'm trying to explain stuff people hate in first edition, is what I'm thinking about. This is the most common place. I nearly always have to talk about the assumed game of that. And the assumed game includes a campaign layer, which is a particular kind of game. That's what we're going to say. It's different to what most people play when they play D&D or when they play Star Wars or whatever it is.
Right. So really talking about the more... what is it? The platonic ideal of the sandbox.
Yeah.
We want a hex map. We want keyed encounters. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I've played that.
Yeah.
I ran that.
Yeah. You've run that. Was that your Keep on the Borderlands game?
No,
is that what you're thinking about?
I would never presume. No, that was the Carcosa was my attempt at
running
doing just a full-on sandbox where I had very little idea where people would go, but I did eventually figure out that, like, say, if I place a dungeon somewhere, that'll sort of attract them like flies, and they loved it.
So let's say this, what is when we say a classic campaign, we sort of are using an idea that's the same as a sandbox. So let's define sandbox. Why is it called a sandbox?
I guess it's called a sandbox because you can play around in it like a child, right? Like the children's toy. The idea is kind of that instead of, the DM predefining kind of like the structure of the campaign, we're gonna stop the big bad evil guy, or you're just gonna run dungeons and you'll damn well enjoy it. It's more that you create an environment, and the players can kind of like explore it. As they desire.
Yeah, look, I suggest here's just a comparison that's come to mind. And I mean, it sounds obvious, but I don't think I've ever put it like this. We often talk in classic D&D circles about location-based design. So rather than quest-based design, Prince, you must go to the harem of the Dutch man things and defeat them all and rescue my fair daughter. That is the mission today.
Why is your daughter in a harem full of guys?
Yeah.
I won't inquire. Okay.
But rather than the idea that Prince turns up for a session and you get told you have to go to this place, and then you go to this place, and then you go to this place, and this is the mission. Instead, there are places to go, and there will be reasons to go there, but really the location is the draw. The location and the dynamic of the dungeon is the draw. And I guess you could say at the same level, in the same way at the higher level, the sandbox campaign is the location, the world is the draw. The location is what's persistent.
Or even, the players decide to try to rob a caravan or something for a session. You're like,
sure.
no problem. Yeah. right?
Oh yeah, because that's in the location. That's not kind of abandoning location based play. It's the
It's
location is the world. The
yeah,
whole world is
you're supposed to be more self-driven, keeping
Mm,
in mind that you should probably still be motivated by gaining gold and glory. That doesn't
yeah.
change. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, instead of the DM, pulling you by a leash, you're supposed to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
You're supposed to
Yeah.
go out on your own.
And I guess the way that happens, the way that players are motivated, we'll come back to world building because there's been some hot discussion on the nature of world building and what it's there for, whatever else. Good discussions that we've been part of that I think are partly what spurs the discussion today.
Real
And
world world building, I'm told,
yeah,
is not only fake, but it's
but
also it has
yeah,
never
yeah,
been
yeah.
tried. It's actually impossible. Yeah.
No one has ever world built. I think we saw some movement on that today, actually. But yeah, the idea is that players are motivated in a fairly open space where there are different things they theoretically could do by the incentives offered. Okay, well, look, the prince is saying he'll pay you this much to go and do this. However, there is like a weird rumor of a ruined temple in the swamp that no one goes to, but it's
Uh,
rumored to have lots of treasure. That's a classic kind of like, here's some things you could do, here's different incentives, a
yeah,
very
and
simple.
then and even then, right? Like there might be
Mm,
there might be something else that catches their fancy, and if you've done your
yeah.
if you've created a world that's like robust enough,
Mm,
if you've filled in the right details in
mm,
advance, or if you're capable of like inferring them in
yeah.
a consistent manner, then that can still be a great adventure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's that. Yeah. A third category or third type of adventure you could do there is not just the prince's mission and the mysterious temple, but also the emergent thing that just happens. And this could happen via detailed random encounter tables, giving interesting things. The players being like, "Oh, so you're saying that this is a major trading port? Do you think we could like smuggle some stuff? Whatever it might be." Like players start coming up with ideas because you tell them information, sometimes in passing, about the world, and they hook onto that. And so there's this kind of, I think, yeah, that's the sandbox is all these things are possible. It's not just that the player does one thing. And I think it's worth saying, I'll say here, that does not exclude a mega dungeon campaign where it seems like there's only one thing to do, because actually the mega dungeon usually consists of different things the players can do. There's usually a city with other stuff. And Gary talks about this in the 1E DMG, that of course there'll be times to go back to the city from the adventure and do stuff there as a kind of, we talked about this last time, sometimes at least as a bit of a palate cleanser. So there's, even in something that's very focused on one big adventure, a mega dungeon, it still can be a sandbox, I think is the point. It can still have these different levels and layers to
Well,
it.
yeah, right. One doesn't really preclude the other. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
more like in one case you have this sort of like this sort of tent pole in the center that
Yeah.
they both
We
cut their
yeah,
teeth
the
on, and they
temple
can
dungeon,
kind
yeah.
of like
Mm,
keep returning to it
yeah.
if they know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think an interesting example of this, because we don't have Castle Greyhawk, but an interesting example of how a mega dungeon might work with that sort of thing that comes to my mind is Stonehell, where Stonehell is 10 levels, plus including some sub-levels or plus some sub-levels of just, it's a mega dungeon. There's loads of stuff to do. There's loads of people to talk to. There's factions. There's different things you could go try to get. Oh, we won't go that way. We'll go this way. But there's also Michael Curtis published 2 supplements, which were adventures outside of Stonehell, which you could go and do. Like, here's some side things. I guess B2 Keep on the Borderlands has a similar thing. There is the Keep on the Borderlands, but there's also a couple of other
Well,
places you could go to.
with like my game running Keep on the Borderlands, I think Keep on the Borderlands is I guess it's a little bit of a like, it's not quite a sandbox in miniature. There's a little bit of direction there, but especially if you
Yeah.
expand the wilderness a little bit, it does give you
Yeah.
loads of different options and venues for
Yeah.
exploration.
Well,
I would never
I think
say this
that's
is
what I
a
mean.
complete sandbox kind of
No,
adventure, but
but
sorry,
it's interesting.
yeah,
Yeah. Sorry. No, I was just agreeing that yes, it's not as a published product a finished sandbox, but it is there in Genesis. It's not just a dungeon. Gary breaks the rules of the basic line immediately by deciding to add a wilderness map with 3 other locations on it, or whatever it is.
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. 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 Indeed, sandboxes have borders, and you can only really run them with Jeff O'Arian timekeeping. You're quite right, Doof.
No.
This is for those innocents out there a reference to a subculture of play that we will not name. Yeah. So yeah, indeed, yeah. Random gives a really good example actually there of emergent sandbox play. You need something that isn't in the world. It's not just that you can't buy it, so you go and do something.
Although ironically, if you die and you want to raise somebody and you can't afford it, then those priests, they will put a quest on you, usually in the form of a gaze, right?
Yeah.
So it's actually this is actually a rare case when you do get a sort of supernatural gun pointed at your head. You do have to do what the DM says. And that's great because then you break out the special dungeons that otherwise they don't want to go into. It's when you break out the fetish dungeons.
It's also that the player chose it.
Yeah.
The player chose it.
Magical realm.
Yeah.
Yes. Piss Forest.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've done this, albeit it was kind of a 3-shot anyway. It's the Planescape stream on my channel. In that case, I didn't really need a gayest, but it was like you're being gayest to do something. Oh no, sorry, it's the Spelljammer. It's the Spelljammer campaign. Players were gayest to keep a secret, so they did the mission, keeping the secret, don't they get the reward? Like, oh, okay. That wasn't quite railroading them. They didn't have to do the mission, I guess, but it did. It was a thing where they chose to do this thing, so they took the cost with it, and that's okay. Like limitations that happen organically are 100% legitimate. So here's the real question. Hi, Lynch. The real question is: are sandboxes possible? Or are they fake? Is it actually? But we're saying this as if it's like a.
As if this is an actual question.
Yeah. Well, no. But we're talking as if sandboxes are real. But I think it's not. Let's say many people. This is a non-trivial thing. I mean, you can read blogs.
Ontologically real.
Yeah.
Like,
Can you imagine them? This is one of Thomas's arguments for the existence of universals, isn't it? Where he's like, you can imagine a 29. You know what a 29-sided shape is, but you cannot realistically constantly imagine one. But yeah, like plenty of people go on like story game oriented blogs and stuff, and they're like, sandboxes aren't real. No one actually plays in sandboxes. It's all linear. So
listen, there is real as apple pie, right? Or friendship. Yeah. Okay, it's there. I'm not sure if like usually. You can probably make some sort of annoying argument that the actual freedom in a sandbox is still sort of bounded, that the actual action range and what the players can do is still kind of like limited, and there's only a few choices and that sort of stuff. But that's on the one hand, it's probably true, but it also doesn't really matter. It kind of misses the point. I feel the idea of a sandbox is more that you're player driven and that you can that the players direct sort of like the pace. They kind of like choose their own meandering path through life, and the DM prepares a great deal of I should say creates a world that's like robust enough and interesting enough to sort of sustain that pace of exploration. And if that doesn't work, put some good dungeons here, or basically that's kind of like it. And it doesn't matter if if there's a little bit of cloak and dagger going on, or if the actual options aren't infinite. This is the point behind the sandbox.
Yeah. So I think the idea that the platonic sandbox actually does only exist in the world of ideas, but that does not mean there are not actual sandbox campaigns. JB, no, this is not a discussion about campaigns. It's a discussion about Thomas Aquinas. I don't know if you're misinformed about that, but this will just be a detailed exploration of Thomas's metaphysics tonight.
By two people that are really completely ignorant of him. This is going to be a stream where we infer what Thomas Aquinas may have said based only on our.
I read a Spark Notes.
Having watched the Star Trek and the X-Files.
Yeah. I read some angry people on Twitter about him, but I didn't really understand it.
Because you didn't know who he was. Yeah, I get it.
No.
Anyway,
but now I'm an expert. Yeah. Yeah. See, I actually think there's a good example there of like something that happens in sandboxes or real campaigns is that you actually care about distance and timekeeping. We should talk about that tonight. So in that case, let's move on to the.
Oh, wait a minute.
Let's talk about world building.
So Wizard Jim, that's random. He mentioned something.
That's random.
In my rules cyclopedia 2-year Corona Crisis game that I ran with my colleagues, this situation actually also came up. That because I used I think I used the map of the Grand Duchy of Karamakos, and suddenly that stuff does start to matter. If you if they die somewhere in the wilderness, where they're actually like, oh shit, we don't have time to. How many 9th level clerics are there in Karamakos? And it's like only like 5 or something, and they knew 1. So then you have them like making plans for how they're going to transport the body and use X number of horses, and suddenly timekeeping does start to like play a role. Yeah, for sure.
What about world building? We've had some discussions about this off stream, but what about world building? Like, how much world building do you have to do to have a good campaign? What, if we've said a campaign consists in a sandbox campaign consists of there's choices, players drive the action, you're preparing stuff. How much do you have to do to start? Let's start there.
How much do you have to do?
Well, as in, what's a bare minimum for running the game? Let's put it that way.
I would at least make sure that in the beginning you have enough, I guess enough sort of like, there should be enough hexes around them, I guess, with keyed encounters, so they have, even if they just start moving in a random direction, that you'll have interesting stuff to go by, and probably not even that. You should have a general geography of the area. That should be good. Several hooks, maybe a couple of keyed encounters on the hexes, and if they're just going to randomly explore in one direction, they should probably just figure out how to use those random encounters properly and play on the fly. Definitely have some details about the local area and a few central truths about the world that you're playing in, but that could just be in your head. I think the amount of preparation is it works if you do. If you prepare properly, right, you can save yourself a world of hurt. But sometimes I hear people, they get into this crazy idea where they have to, in order to run a game of D&D, you have to do all of this preparation. I don't think it's true.
Some thoughts here. Grit says, do you do it top down, like high concepts first and big ideas, big level discussion, or do you just start with? I guess do you start with the town or village? Doof says, why not both?
You go bottom up, I think, as well. Of some sort of starting town, definitely. You want to be even that, right? With Carcosa, I actually sort of shipwrecked them, and then they recovered their starting equipment from the wreckage, right? So you have to like wander around until you find a place of habitation. You can also do it like that, but a village is a great idea. A couple of treasure maps. That's right. In the beginning, wandering around in the wilderness is going to probably hurt them seriously if they try anyway.
Yeah, if we're playing even if we're playing basic, there's a reason why it's expert is the wilderness module. But especially in AD, especially in AD&D, where you are like, you're using the DMG. Like I don't actually have it. It's over there. It's I've been exiled from my seat by a bad router, everyone. The DMG tables, right? You can just meet a dragon, and you can reaction check it. You can do these things. You've got encounter distances, but there's no limit on there's no upper limit. So you need stuff that's nearby. The layer maps was actually something he mentions that I was thinking, which is there's a degree to which you're like, okay, look, if they are in the wilderness at all, they can have a random encounter with a chance of the monster being in its lair. And so I think having a couple of caves and a couple of ruin maps that are generic and like 2-room or 4-room or something, like enough for half a session, that kind of thing. I think that's a good idea. I think
that's a good way to prep. I would say so, and I would have I would always make sure that there's like one at least one like normal sized dungeon for them to explore. That too, for sure.
Random does say, let's get that up. so this is part of the conversation actually we had, was world building is done most for the DM's own enjoyment, and E actually has said a couple of times, you said it today, didn't you, E, who's in the comments, TB, that world building and DMing are slightly different hobbies. World building is something you could do without any DMing, and DMing is something you can do without having built your own world. I
It's
think
true.
that's a good distinction.
However,
Yeah,
if you're adept at both, then obviously combining both of them, that's
it's good.
like the sweet spot,
Yeah,
right? Everybody wants that. The
yeah.
problem is I feel we're sort of, again, we're traumatized by all these horror stories of like this frustrated novel author DMs that I again I've also played under those. So this was the Schwarze Auge, which is the dark eye. Was right? You can really tell that this is a just somebody who has like this story in their head, and you're just sort of like used to act that out. That's why all the railroads.
Yeah, literally, you have that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's yeah. I think actually, not a crossover of the two, but kind of demonstration of those two things is actually, and we talked about this. I literally talked about this today. The FR Grey Box, Forgotten Realms, a really good campaign set. But
I do want to get into that, but I do want to make a point about what is it, medieval fantasy and feudalism, or Japanese feudalism.
Yeah.
That's a good point, and I think people maybe overlook that when they get too caught up in their sort of like exotic world building settings. That even if you put all that time and effort into it, right, you still have to communicate that to your players. So you better be damn sure that you're good at presenting it as well, right?
I think you want a really high concept sell, like this is, as Random says, this is feudal Japan, this is medieval fantasy, this is if we're playing Tecumel, this is a sort of Mesoamerica, that kind of thing.
Well, the advantage there is that whenever there's a detail that you haven't thought of, and you're unless you've been living in the same fantasy world for 20 years or something like that, there's probably loads of details like that. You can always fall back to just research, and you can use the extant culture as a template to fill in any of the details. If you're like, actually, you've never thought about like whether we can have slaves or not, and then you just look, okay, in medieval times, no, they would have serfs. How would that work? And then you go on a Wikipedia deep dive.
I think that's good. Yeah,
10 hours later.
I was saying, read this. You see that with Ed Greenwood, he's a world builder in the sense he likes writing about his world. And a big thing is actually, and this kind of gets heavily diluted by Wizards, he's like, I don't want this to be a medieval Europe. I want this to be distinctive settings. He then becomes a game designer because D&D comes out and he likes it, and he runs a Mega Dungeon campaign. Then he runs kind of other kinds of campaigns, several large-scale, long-running campaigns. He writes modules that are good, and then he kind of gives that up. TSR are like, you can just be a guy who writes world stuff for us, and he's like, great, this is what I always wanted to do. Right. And he's a rare exception where he wasn't a fake designer pretending to be a designer. He was a real designer, but the two are distinct. And once once there was weak incentive to DM, he was like, okay, well, my group, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to just write about the world.
Yeah, I guess because coming up with details of the world and then translating those details into a game, or even coming up with aspects of the world with the game in mind, right? Keeping it. Yeah. These are kind of like separate. These are separate skills or separate. Yeah, basically.
In one sense, one is creative and one is technical, and like this, it's the set.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying there's no creativity in making rules. What I mean is rules are something that can be iterated mechanically and experientially.
Well, so I don't entirely agree. I look at, say, these lists of magic items in magazines, or I look at, like, what is it? Anthony Huzo's magic item stuff, or whatever, Gabor Lux's entries in Fight On 2, just to name a few recent examples that I just came up with off the top of my head. And what I actually see is that, like, it still is creative. You're still sort of like trying to come up with these new things, and only the condition is that these these new wondrous items that you have to come up with need to also have a place within sort of like the ecosystem of Dungeons and Dragons itself. But you can definitely be creative within the framework of Dungeons and Dragons. That's fine.
Oh no,
totally
I don't mean you can't. No, I'm distinguishing that world building is a creative task. Making rules out of the things you come up with and making them fit is a technical task. That's
yeah. Well, it's fine. We'll move on.
Yeah. So the reason I kind of say that is it's an interesting thing talking about it the other day, that actually AD&D is a rare example of a rule set I don't think has really been significantly improved upon in the space. In where you look at historical war games, you look at any kind of war game, and you look at set stuff in the 70s, whether it's miniature wargaming at man-to-man scale or whether it's hex encounter with kind of very simple CRTs, and you look now and you're like, technically the stuff now is so much better. It is interesting to me that D&D has not gone that way. He says, you go for it.
AD&D, I guess, has it has a strange position in the sense that it was the first, the successor to the original, and it came out at a time when role playing was completely new. So I guess instead of having a timeline where people retain sort of the assumptions of AD&D and then iterate from there, right? Which would have like sort of presumably facilitated at least like minor improvement or perhaps a new edition with a better layout. Instead, the priorities also shifted. So it's kind of like you're trying to hit a moving target, right? So the second edition basically, I guess maybe some of these things would have been fixed, but at the same time, the priorities and the play culture weren't quite the same. So yeah, you're right. It hasn't really been improved upon, I guess.
No. E says, the ideal DM is comfortable in both the left and right hemispheres of the brain, i.e. creative, technical, and those who strongly favor one or the other often have bizarre takes on how the game should work. I think that's kind of sums up the crossover, where it's also that technical solutions can be creative in that sense, can't they? And good world building tends to be coherent, which has that technical element. Like there is a crossover naturally of the two as well. And because D&D is a creative act, it's not just a here are your pieces, move them around the board. I think that that's obviously a super destructive take on the game. I think the world has to matter, but if the world matters too much, it becomes like this weird. Oh, but what's the story of the game? What's the story, man? Like,
if you look at they're called Advanced Adventures by I think Expeditious Retreat Press, and it was one of these high-level adventures that I reviewed. Right?
You've reviewed several of them, haven't you? Several of the AAs, I think.
Yes. Some of them were kind of okay, but these AAs are, well, first of all, it's not quite that they're made for tournament games, right? So they have sort of inherent limitation to them. But what you see there is that often structurally they're kind of okay, but they're very conventional in a sense. They don't have the same sort of like fantasy to them. And you end up with stuff that would play very well, but ultimately doesn't, it doesn't inspire. And I do think that even, especially in a long campaign, there is a fantasy component to that for a reason. It should be.
Well, I think that's an interesting point.
As well.
The idea that you could enjoy D&D as a purely technical exercise, like as the rules are defined, the pieces are defined, and you play it, and it kind of you enjoy it at that level. But it's something which might be hard to sustain for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Like how often are you going to do it? When for most players who are like that are going to want to play a different thing eventually, aren't they? They're going to be like, look, I want a different challenge with different components.
I don't know. I'm sure you could find people that would. Maybe this is also sort of a. It really depends on the, I guess, the sort of the audience. I'm sure you could find people that would be, thrilled to run through, I don't know, tournament dungeons or just funhouse stuff, or maybe even just play a very rich sort of open sandbox game, but then, give zero shits about like any of the actual whatever the fictional histories you came up with. They don't give a shit, whatever. But I do think so that in practice, there needs to be a sort of like spirit animating it all. It can't just be sort of Legos that you're playing with.
Yeah. Oh, I suppose let's put it. I'll put it inductively. Sorry. Inductively instead, experientially. That I have not met a player who's been in, and this is obviously partly a comment on it's a selection bias of people who play my games. Having run many multi-year campaigns, I've not had a player who's like, I don't care at all about the world or the things that happen in it. Like that must be such a small selection of people. Basically, I'll put it that way. There may well be people. I agree
I've
with you.
seen it with my ex DM was actually my my player as well. I've played with him as well, and
yeah,
we did both Palace and Slithive, and he didn't really care that much about Palace, right?
yeah,
But he did like Slithive because the actual the gameplay part in Slithive is you have way more options. It's more open, more grand. The lore part in Palace, he didn't care about it.
yeah. So the degree to which you might well be, especially if you see it in its original context as a campaign ender, you're like, oh wow, the stakes are so high, we really care about it. Whereas obviously, yeah, you might well be, especially because one thing you'll notice this if you look up his Dreaming Tower of Ormolu or whatever it's called module on his blog, the Starfire Neonate is seeded in what was more or less the third session or second session of the game for his players. You know, like this is a thing which they cared about.
By whom?
Anthony Huso. You're talking about
the dreaming,
yeah,
the Dream House of the Nether Prince.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, so you see that kind of stuff is just like, you see that has stakes for people, whereas obviously if it doesn't have stakes for people, they care less about that side of it. They're like, hey, some people will be like, I don't care about the story. Some people will say, I do. Okay. So I think we talked around world building a bit there. And I think E suggested earlier that, and I think this is good advice, and I'll just repeat it here. You can either just buy something, and that's fine. And maybe we should talk about pre-written campaigns. That might be helpful. Or you can make your own. But if you're going to make your own, I think what E's suggestion was, if you're making your own world as opposed to just kind of buying something, it doesn't. I mean, I don't think it literally means you have to write as much material as is in this box straight up, but you have to have some sense of a world that has detail. That has the. And he already suggests that like you can have. There's a detailed settlement. There's some detailed dungeons. There's some detailed layers and encounter tables and stuff like that. Like you need to be able to be good enough and willing enough to do that. So I think. Well, what do you think of that? Is that a good distinction, or should people be allowed to prep much less? Like in terms of their world building. Let's just finish up on the world building prep point there.
I still think that you can. What was described isn't really that much prep to start with, and I am a proponent of if you're going to a lot of campaigns. Again, people over prepare. They make this incredibly detailed world, and then their campaign ends in 5 sessions because of like scheduling conflict or something, right? No, you just do like one little region. You don't even have to sort of really construct this world, right? You need to have maybe a few sort of like pillars. What are we going to do, right? Yeah, it's going to be like maybe ancient Rome, or is it going to be more medieval? Maybe it'll be a blend. Whatever. Have some idea, and as you play, usually as the players interact with various areas, that sort of like prompts you to to consider them in greater detail.
Grutzy, what a little passage about starting the campaign. Do you want to define that in the comments for us? So no, I agree. I think obviously you could exaggerate and say, oh no, you need to have literally this much writing to start, or you need to. Some people would go even further, but I think the idea that you have to have, if you're building it yourself. But okay, let's over prepping. Grutzy says. On the other hand, buying products. What do you think are the things you should be like? What are some good campaign level products you have bought or played?
Well, I don't know if I would call it good from an OSR perspective. I really enjoyed Dark Heresy, but that's because I'm a huge, or I used to be a huge Warhammer 40k nerd. So I was already so well versed in that sort of fictional universe that it was like super easy for me to come up with good hooks or adventures or anything, right? It just felt like sort of like just this incredibly rich world I could just dive into and live there like for all eternity. So that can be a good example. if for for classical fantasy games, I would get something like Wilderness of High Fantasy, something that's
Yeah,
actually quite light on
Wilderlands,
the
Wilderlands of high
lore.
fantasy.
Yes, Wildlands of High Fantasy. That's right. Something is quite high on the lore. Sorry, quite light on the actual sort of encyclopedic detail. But it has a ton of like gameable content in there, and just enough detail so that your mind can kind of like infer and build a picture from that, right? And in that process, you make it your own, and it feels more organic when you run it.
Yeah, no, I agree. So yeah, I think what's good about Wildlands is that, and I think actually we talked about this last time. I've got a few things, but these are the echoes plus other books,
yes.
echoes from Foamhawk plus other books that have Aurelion, one of Gabor Lux's settings in them. I think he has in Canadian. Oh no, that's very offensive. In Hungarian, he has written up a version of it, I think, because I saw him put a photo up the other day. But yeah, I think here he has a hex map. He gives the hex key to start with. He then starts detailing particular dungeons and environments within that. And
Perfect.
he references he references a Judges Guild supplement with one of the Wildlands hexes detailed. And I think that's interesting. That's obviously his inspiration is Wildlands, and the idea that you start with just a very high, and probably this is more prep than you need to do, by the way. You don't even need to have a full continent. Well, this is a large island map. It's Australia, really. You don't have to do that, but you can, basically.
And it's cool.
The point. Yeah.
Right? Your players see that, and then they're like, oh, man. Right? Yeah. That's great.
And yeah, you have just a note on 1 in every 7 hexes. Let's put it that way, almost like, on the hex flower, you have 1 in every 7 hexes has something in it, and it's just a few sentences, and you can develop that. I think that's not a bad place to start, or that's what you should look for from products. That's not the only good products. And I say a good campaign level product is the box set, not the folio, World of Greyhawk. Technically, therefore, the second edition of World of Greyhawk fantasy game setting, which whilst not perfect, is very good.
Greyhawk I've also actually I do know it. I have read it. It's been a while, but isn't that a little bit contentious? World of Greyhawk. I do remember all the Gary Gygax adventure hooks in there are very good.
He gives some possible adventures which are
only
amazing.
A few, yes.
Yeah, no, he doesn't give those. I'd say, well, what you can say is, one, it has some of the most iconic campaign maps around, the Darlene maps, as they're called. It's a weird one. Probably it gives information that indicates a certain kind of game, and the assumption is he's like, okay, you're going to buy some modules to go with this, and that will give you detail on hexes because that's how TSR published them. And when you're using this is partly because the players are going to start getting involved in like political stuff, traveling around the world, etc.
Yeah, because they all have armies, right? Every
so
region has its own.
Details of their army. So there are some assumptions which are not universal. It's I don't know. E may still be in the chat. He should give his thoughts because he'll certainly know this one from back in the day. But it has good encounter charts. It has detail. It has probably over detailed weather rules. I use them, but they're like, you don't need them to be quite that detailed, but they're pretty good.
Even if you would just have like the map, right, and the encounter tables, by the way, per region, all that stuff, that's already very good.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
You would just have to like fill in the little details where the players can move around. But then in case something happens, something untoward, you have so much to I feel fall back on.
And because you're also using the DMG, the monster manuals and the DMG. So there's a set of books you're using with this. So yeah, of course, it's not just that you use this and nothing else. So I think it's not that every setting that gets published and that you might want to buy then is the hex map with a hex key and this and that. I think there was a reason why those are in old school circles, particularly kind of classic old school circles, so highly rated, right? Is because if you're buying a product, being able to just pick it up and run it is actually, this is something Bryce Lynch will sometimes emphasize, and I think he's basically right. That you can take or leave this. There's a complexity here, but like you can just be like, look, if I can pick it up and I know how to play D&D and I can read it and then run it, that's a good product. And that does apply to the campaign as well. As if you can get Wildlands as your example, and we've just referenced Aurelion as well. You can't do that with World of Greyhawk, but you can nearly do it with World of Greyhawk. So yeah,
here, and I agree that it would be a good quality. I wanna
Mm.
preface that with a little bit of like distinction, right? It's
Yeah. Please do.
I think it is a good quality that something is that you strive for a sort of simplicity, right? You strive to present sort of the information that's contained within in a way that makes running it very easy. Uh, but
Hmm.
at the same time, I think people lose track of um, perspective sometimes, where if you're expected to, spend, you already spend all of this money, you're
Mm.
going to run, what
Yeah.
is it? You're going to run your game here, 50 sessions. Is
Yeah.
it weird for them to expect you to put a little bit of time and effort into like understanding it?
There's give and take here, isn't there? Like, if so, they're
Yeah,
expecting you to pay for it, they actually have to turn up and give you stuff. I've reviewed a lot of second edition box set settings on the channel. You can go, we've talked about some of them. People may have watched some of those videos. And I think with those, what you find is many of the nearly universally they overwrite them, and even where they're good, nearly universally there is a degeneration from the World of Greyhawk standard, basically, where you get to a point of being like, okay, how do I put this into action? Because there's
yes,
increasing amounts,
that's
and I
bad.
think that's a gap. And we're talking about decent. I'm not talking about terrible box sets. We're like decent box sets, decent box sets. And I think a problem there is that you're like, okay, I know I can buy modules to do this a bit, but like, I think it's okay to expect the people selling you a campaign setting to do the work, or at least to tell you buy these 2 books, like
That was
Alkadine. That is kind of how it
I
works, for instance.
I got asked, and he was actually the guy emailed me back. It was actually very courteous, but I got asked to review a fifth edition
Mm.
campaign setting. Um, I think a while back, and
Yeah.
at some point I finally reviewed it, and I gave it 1 star. Right?
It probably wasn't even
I
that
did a
bad.
detailed
You
job,
just
right?
hated
Like
it so much. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I thought I really thought it was bad.
Mm.
And really my main point about uh, I think my main point or my main criticism of it was also that it had almost no gameable content, right?
Mm.
Even if you say, well, what is it? There's this term flying around in the OSR, and it is, what is it again? Is it conceptual density? Probably
Mm.
is.
Yeah.
So that's like fetishized, like, oh, no conceptual density. If you make this campaign setting with whatever, you just have elves and orcs, and the idea is like, well, you could have come up with that. I could have come up with that, right? Which is true, but if you present all that information in a way that is instantly runnable, then you've still done a lot of like useful work that I
Yeah.
now do not have to, do
Yeah.
myself. I
Well,
can actually
I was
play
going to
that
say,
instantly. Yeah.
well, yeah,
Yeah.
Aurelion is a sort of just a slightly Celtic themed sword and sorcery set, like sword and sorcery vanilla fantasy setting.
Right.
And it's a very good setting. To be like, there's not very much conceptual density here. I would say Joseph Manola, who I think came up with the phrase, a more or less retired blogger who has some quite good stuff. I don't think he would say that's bad. I think his point was conceptual density is it shouldn't be that you spend a lot of time hearing one idea, and that's rather you should get as much stuff down on the paper as possible. And in that sense, I think
Mm,
the 2 cross, yeah,
I think he alluded to in
mm,
his blog post, right,
yeah,
that it really was about basically using all these things that you already have, or describing that,
mm,
say, the Vikings, you've got the Northmen and they raid the shores in their long ships, and it's cold in
yeah,
their land, right? And they fight with swords, and they've got helmets with horns, right? So this sort of stuff where
yeah,
you really already know it. I will say, like, vanilla fantasy it's an art as well. Usually,
yeah,
fantasy is usually anything but boring if you do it properly,
yeah,
because
good.
you use
Well,
these
yeah,
concepts that have been used before, but you figure out a way to sort of like you scrape away all of the gunk that has
mm,
accumulated around it over like 20 years of like pop culture, and you find its essence, and you present that in a way that it's like it provokes like wonder and delight, even though people already know what it is.
oh yeah. So no, I think that's the thing. The idea, and that's T.S. Eliot, Purifying the Dialect of the Tribe. This is the Thomas Aquinas and T.S. Eliot stream for this month. But yeah, the idea that you have to keep doing that process of purifying the dialect of the tribe, which does not mean for him taking it back to Saxon purity. He means making it useful again. And I think it's the same thing for Vanilla Fantasy, is you can recreate it and make it fresh and new for yourself, but it's kind of an ongoing process. Becca says Rifts has a lot of inverted commas conceptual density.
Rifts is cool. Rifts has
yeah.
everything. You just
And
put
random
everything has
says
been
glue-
squeezed into it.
Yeah, it has glue fumes. Grutzy does give the like a reasonable caveat. I think this is true. No one needs a description of the 156th orc. What he means is, within the context of redescribing vanilla, that's actually fine. It's just that you can allude to it. You can say, look, orcs are like this. We're not going to spend a supplement talking about how orcs are exactly the same as orcs in every other supplement. I think that's a fair point. Yeah.
That's
So in that sense,
at the same time,
yeah,
you do good orc tribes. That's how what is it, Jim Bambara and I almost said Gavin McGinnis. Shit, what is his name? It's Jim Bambara.
Everyone cancel Prince Dave Gallagher.
Dave Gallagher, the Warhammer guys from TSR UK. They have in B10 they have orcs, right? And they have goblins, and they're fucking cool. Like all these tribes, they feel different. I'm guessing they're based on whatever Tacitus is the Germanica or whatever, like these Celtic tribes or Goth tribes. That's great, right? But yeah, you're right. You don't want to read a whole. You don't want to read again how orcs are actually like very aggressive and they have a tribal culture and they're ruled by strength. Yeah, okay, you're okay. Get the hell out.
I think what I would say more to the point, if you're writing a campaign setting, which is the relevant thing we're talking about here, say the orcs in this area are like that. That is one sentence. Never talk about it again. As in, if you have nothing else to say, don't say it. I think that's the key thing: is don't waste people's time. If you're just giving them something that's very generic, don't waste their time.
I mean, I guess that would be a good advice if you're going to make a lot of like detail. I would say it's perfectly acceptable to use all of these generic building blocks.
Yeah,
but consider like customizing it a little bit, right? If you got nobody likes generic bandits, make a time into the setting a little bit. Like who are these bandits?
I agree.
What have they done?
I agree that. The point is that is more fun. Like it's not absolutely necessary when you're coming up off a random encounter with like a layer for some goblins, and you're just like, you pull out a layer map and you generate the goblins. It's okay if they're fairly generic goblins. That's probably okay.
I would immediately come up with a little, like, they've got a red hand on their head or whatever they wear, fish bones, something like that.
I'd do that kind of stuff. But what I mean is, you don't need to reinvent the wheel when you're getting a percentage in layer check, right?
No.
But in the campaign setting you're buying, because anyone dropping in here, this is the point is, okay, we've talked about world building. Now what about buying worlds? What do you want in a product? In that case, if what all the effort they've put in is to be like, we've got 4 pages on these goblins, but the only information that you really get out of it is the names of the NPCs and the fact they wear fishbone chest chainmail.
The various recipes that they have for fish.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and that's
courtly rituals as well. The goblin mating rituals, very important. Burial customs.
And I find, again, as I say, having read lots of campaign settings, it's an interest of mine, including decent campaign settings that aren't amazing but are okay. You lose so many pages to this garbage of stuff where they, even if it's kind of fresh, it's not that fresh. Whereas you read stuff that's much more condensed, and basically good creators know how to kind of, they're creative enough and they know how to condense it enough, I think, is the two things.
I think it comes down to at least the two things I kind of isolated by looking at this example where it failed catastrophically in both areas. And again, this is only my opinion. But on the one hand, right, I feel that we as a consumers, right, you're willing to put in a little bit of work yourself or cut a person some slack if maybe the campaign setting isn't like immediately table ready, right? You just have to throw the book on the table and it, you can immediately begin playing. And if you open it on a random page, but it's full of like all this cool, interesting stuff that really gets your mind going and gets you enthusiastic to actually start coming up with, I don't know, maybe like dungeons or campaign concepts or whatever. Start
it
working
excites
out.
You, I think.
Right. Yeah. That's perfectly fine. You can make something that's maybe a little bit more vanilla, but it's like very playable immediately.
Yeah.
That's fine too. You might even have the the perfect golden perfect campaign setting where it's both, but right. But these are kind of like the axes on which you
Mm.
need to be able to operate.
Yeah.
It can't both be vanilla, but then also very hard to use. Then no.
Yeah. Becca says no pre-published campaign setting is going to give you a good campaign, and he has a follow-up on this. Without a number of accompanying adventures, maybe not even then. I say
disagree.
Yeah. Why would you disagree? Argue with him. Fight the commenter.
Well, if you know how to make good adventures, the campaign setting should allow you to infer details from that. You can make good adventures within that. Would it help to have a line of like good adventures? Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, it depends on your skill, doesn't it? It's a skill issue at that point. He follows it up with something which I'll put up in a second, actually, but there's some good comments there to pick up on. Again, back to Aurelion. Of course, that's partly how Gabor does this, is you have 2 issues of the Hex Key and some adventures, and you get increasing numbers of adventures, including there is a charity adventure, Pearladon Manor. And so the idea is, there's a bunch of locations detailed that give you the content to pick up and not have to design every single thing from the ground up. Yeah, it is desirable, I think. And I think it's something.
Thought. Oh, sure. I should let you finish. My apologies.
No. You finish, and then we'll move on to the other comments.
Okay. Well, I think here we do have to make a distinction with what Mr. Becker is saying, what BX Black Racer is saying, right? Because in the one hand, you have settings like Greyhawk, and a couple of them came out in the OSR that they're more or less aligned with a lot of the assumptions that D&D already does, right? With maybe a handful of exceptions, if any.
Yeah.
So that automatically makes it very easy to take any adventure from any edition of D&D that came out, or any older edition of D&D that came out,
and just put it into the campaign.
Put it in there, yes.
Yeah.
And it's very easy. You have to maybe change Red Wizards of Thay to, I don't know, Scarlet Spires, or what is it? The
Grey
what are they
Wizards
called
of
again?
Thay.
The Greyhawk guys, the Crimson Brotherhood,
the Scarlet Brotherhood.
Yeah. Right, easy, done. Some concept like that will exist in some form of another in these types of settings.
Yeah.
But then you have the really strange ones, right? Or the ones that really are divergent and that fuck with several of D&D's core assumptions. There,
or
you might
are aesthetically very different. This is a slightly different thing. So Zion Wishery through Alton's Door by Ben Lawrence, or the Slumbering Ursine Dunes universe by Chris Kutelik. Those have a very different aesthetic. And even if some of the dynamics are the same, like there's local lords, it's semi-feudal or whatever, the mythologies are different and the aesthetics are different. And so if you just said, oh, we'll just put a generic dungeon underneath this place next to a bunch of other weird things, players, I guess there can be a jar, can't there? There can be like this doesn't feel right.
Then they're going to say, I want my weird. What is this? Why are there just goblins behind the door? And then they're gonna they're kind of.
Don't worry, I've reskinned the goblins as boblins.
And then they'll say, "This is so boring," and then I hate this.
You're one of those trad gamers who's into classic stuff, aren't you?
This is stupid. That's what they'll say.
Yep.
I do think, by the way, with Slumbering Earth, I really don't want to disrupt your rhythm. I keep doing it. I keep getting ideas.
We got demonetized last time, Prince, and we know why, don't we, Prince? It was you. It was you.
It was the impressions. It was it was definitely the system. It had nothing to do with my own behavior. I'm sorry. I'll pay you back the $3. We could have.
I was going to say, when you're like, man, I've made like £1 off this stream. I make no money. You're like, great. These goblins have been This is a good example, by the way. This is good. Coming in. Right. What is a thing? There is a goblin village. One line. These goblins have been forcefully converted to the worship of Dagon. 2 out of 6 of them are Deep One hybrids and should check for psionic ability. Great, because then you're like, okay, not all goblins have to be twisted, but when you're like, there's one normal goblin tribe, but the other goblin tribe has a weird thing. Players will have to react to a new situation. It also has game implications, not just creative implications, game implications of this is the challenge.
Yes, it's very good. No, that's a good example of just a detail that will make that goblin tribe memorable, and yeah, they might have to tackle it. They'll get
Yeah.
like something to wait
Because
for.
obviously we actually do think that all this creative and stuff we're talking about ends up being stuff you play, not like, oh well, I'm glad the DM had a good time creating it. It's like no, the players need to interact with it, and that means gameplay. Becca then makes a point, and I think this is probably our next topic: is a campaign is neither the running of the game as a DM nor the world building. Rather, it is the interaction over time of the PCs with the imagined created world using the refereed rules. We've talked about campaign building, campaign setting, but the campaign, the ongoing thing, is the living being that happens with the players.
I would concur. That's why
I think it's a good
said
definition.
it. Even a pre-made campaign setting, and I've used Karamakos of all things.
I quite like some aspects of Karamakos. It's a controversial one, but yeah, or rather the whole known world. I think there's some really good bits and some ridiculous things in the known world.
You have to take the good with the there was the sort of
you
theme
take the good,
park
you take the bad.
vacation Hawaii island that worships
Yeah.
adventurers, which that's a really good hook.
Oh,
There's
that
at least
place.
2 great adventures in there.
Is that Earendi? Is that Earendi?
Earendi, yeah.
Yeah, and then you get Glantry where you're like, oh man, it's some crazy evil mageocracy. Yeah, that's great. You then read the stuff about Glantry. It is cool. You then read the stuff. It's like no one can ever do anything the Mage Kings don't want. And you're like, okay, well, I'm not going to go there, am I? That's the end. That is a classic example of a campaign setting being you can basically the idea is better than the execution, and that's fine. We're not here to have a go at go into detail on that, but like
I feel I've earned the right to opine on Glantry.
Yeah.
I feel I can
you can.
give my
please do.
No, with Glantry, I had this idea that it would be like a sort of a. I guess it would be. It is very much less of a sandbox. It would be less of a sandbox game for sure.
Yeah.
It would be like Dark Hogwarts, basically. You would be you would be doing you would be adventuring just so you can afford your tuition. You would not have any clerics. I don't know how you'd get around it. Maybe by hiring foreign clerics or whatever.
Yeah.
And then eventually, presumably, you get embroiled in the various, skullduggery, arcane
wars. I think there's an interesting thing there that at that point you probably are stretching. Maybe just before we move on to JB's,
JB agrees with me. Excellent. Yes. It is
before
Dark Hogwarts.
Yeah, Dark Hogwarts. Yeah.
This is a philosophical line, by the way. Yes.
Yeah. Before we move on to this point, I think, it's something where that stretches. Let's just talk one last thing about the concept and nature of the campaign in D&D before we talk about the ongoing thing. And I think what I want to say is this is, I know this is why I said at the start, near the start of the stream, after the tech issues, that the campaign or the game in D&D presumes a certain kind of campaign, certain kind of player setup. Players have stables of characters. This is where the one time discussion comes in. Actually, I was talking about this last night with one of my groups. Like, why does it come up in the DMG? Well, it comes up to do with dealing with a particular dynamic of a particular game. Why do level limits come in? Why is it a good play to have a 4th level cap on half-orc clerics? And why would people still take half-orc clerics? And it's because of the presumed campaign. The idea you have a stable of characters, they're at different levels, some are training, some are in different places. You want characters for different jobs, you want characters for different locations, whatever the different concerns are. And so, I think that's one thing is your Dark Hogwarts is something where the AD&D, I know Karamakos is basic or Beckme originally, but
yes.
But there is there are conversion notes, but the assumptions of AD&D begin to break down once you say, okay, it's not a true sandbox. You have one character, a mage apprentice, and you just do stuff to get money for tuition or whatever, which is a perfectly viable game. But I wonder how far that begins to corrode the general infrastructure of the game as a whole, the campaign, when you're like, no, we're going to take away all these assumptions that are there in the DMG text. What do you think? How far can D&D be pressed before it stops being classic?
D&D.
Yeah. When does it become new school or trad or whatever things you want to talk about?
Well, I think by if you ever find yourself in a position where you're where you find yourself working for some sort of central organization and you're just doing missions, then it's gone. That's lame. But I feel you can you can probably violate a few minor assumptions like locally, right? That
Yeah.
as long as sort of like this, it's hard to explain the spirit of like fantasy adventure gaming. That sword and sorcery kind of like spirit is there. As long as you can still, you know, as long as you still have your what do you call that? You can still be proactive. The way that you
Mm,
tackle problems, the way that adventures are more like location based. The DM is more reactive. You are
yeah.
more proactive. Um, as long as that element is not lost, I feel you can get away with saying like, listen, well, you you're gonna need money, right? Until you get money, it's no different than I'm going to blow your mind here. Magic Dark Hogwarts is no different than training costs.
Hmm. Yeah. So in that sense, the way you're running this Glantry game, where you start in Glantry rather than it's a high level end game thing, is you are adventurers and you do adventuring things on the outskirts or in the deeps or in the Underdark or whatever, or whatever it is. And then the overworld of Glantry is just the city layer where you go and do stuff and you get trained. And as at low levels, that's all it has to be. And otherwise, you would run it as it's just a normal game. Otherwise,
I would make sure some of my, and this is again all my trad gaming instincts
yeah,
start popping out. I would say some of you are wizards, right? And then you obviously you need your tuition money, so you're gonna
mm,
have to team up with other adventuring guys,
mm,
right? And get money for your
mm,
for your tuition. That's fine. And in the meantime, you can throw various fucking quests from the resulting from the internal politics of whatever Glantry. You can throw that at them, and if they don't
yeah,
bite, you should also be okay with that. You shouldn't
yeah,
be like, no, I'm gonna drag these bastards back on my story, right?
yeah. Yeah. So no, yeah, I think you can. So that's a defense specifically of Glantry, but I think the point we're making is that once you stretch it, the campaign to being, oh, okay, so you're in this D&D setting. It's a D&D game. Make D&D characters. You're in a D&D setting, but as soon as you say, oh, but really this is being driven by the D&D world, you're being told what to do. I think yeah, like that's the breaking point. And if a setting does not offer that opportunity, then it's not a viable setting, basically.
Mr. Becker makes another point, and I
Yeah.
agree for the most part. I don't agree
Mhm.
that it should always be up to them, because sometimes they
Mm,
screw up. Sometimes they go,
mm,
okay, we really want. I guess that's the buy-in, right? Sometimes they screw up. Somebody dies. They don't have the money. So they go to the temple. Can you bring us back? And the priest, if they don't have any money, might say, okay, but then you're gonna have to go on a quest, right? But I guess that is the buy-in. They can just,
mm.
they can eat the consequences otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, and if orcs attack your town, you can just flee. It's similarly, whatever it is.
Right. I mean, I guess if the world is being if the mind flayers are going to put out the sun, I guess you can say we'll go to the astral plane, we'll live there.
Yeah. I was going to say, yeah, if we're playing particularly the Illithid trilogy by Bruce Cordell, your options for avoiding the adventure are limited because the consequences are world-ending. So,
The
yeah,
the decline and roll up a new character, yeah,
yeah,
sure, but for the most part, I guess I do agree that a lot of it
mm,
should be voluntary and
yeah,
yeah, should be driven by the players for sure.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. That's good. Okay, so let's move on to the lived campaign, like the continuing. Um, yeah, so just some questions to get us going. This is from regular questioner John. Busyness of if a campaign isn't static. So a sandbox. One thing is, should a sandbox, before we move on to non-static campaigns, should a sandbox be static or non-static? Should the campaign be one where other stuff is happening, or where nothing happens and it's purely reactive? How far does the DM have agency in that sense, or the world have agency?
Um, Sorry about that. So the idea that static is basically just that, so that the players are the only sort of
Mm,
like driving,
yeah,
directing force, right? And
yeah,
this is a matter of taste, I guess, but I can definitely see that you're trying to sort of like spice it up by having maybe you have NPCs with their own separate motives. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
oldest trick of the book, right? The rival adventuring party that won't just like if you go away for 7 weeks, then okay, that's great. But then if you come back, the dungeon will be looted.
Yeah.
Whatever orc invasions, as have just been mentioned. I think that stuff is fine. It should be probably it's more a question of like the dosage. It shouldn't be so disruptive that your players can never get anything like meaningfully done without you
Yeah.
screwing it
Every
up again.
week. Yeah. Some
Yeah.
examples from my own play. Just thinking about this is that in my Daggerford game, my Sunday night game, there's a jobs and rumors list by season. So we're in summer 1492. So they have like a list of jobs that they can go on from the job board. There's also rumors, and there's an other as well. And I put in events, like usually an event happens. And so in terms of reactivity, events tend to be time limited to they will run out, like the opportunity to do anything about some events will run out. Like when you hear, this town has been burnt and the raiders are fleeing away from it, then you can either pursue them or you can't. But an actual example of a separate kind of timing is one job was up, which was a freehold out in the wilderness has been reporting orc raids, like persistent orc raids, and needs help. And I basically was like, if they have not gone to it by the end of this month, then the freehold has been burnt down. And they did. They went like 10 days before they went like after 5 weeks or something. And like just before the timer, and then we played the siege of it's the Siege of Krasis Freehold. It's a dungeon adventure, but
Right.
the Siege of Crail Hold, and it was really great. It's really good. We got to play battle system, but that was the thing where I was like, okay, I would say that this is a time sensitive opportunity, even though the players do not officially know that. And some players were like, I kind of feel like that might be a problem if we don't go and help them because they're being attacked. Obviously, if it's more like, okay, an ancient elf has had a puzzle box for 4,000 years and wants you to come and look at it. That's not time limited.
If you don't come within a week, then I'll say fine. I'll keep my own puzzle. I've solved it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's stupid. But if it's like, no, they're under siege, you have to help them. Players start to learn those cues, and so some opportunities are more intentionally time limited. Some I'm more relaxed about. I would say similarly, there was a more open dungeon that's kind of more less time limited, still had a timer on whether or not orcs would be occupying the outskirts of it, like their kind of entrance cave and in the watchtower outside. Because I was like, look, if they don't go to it straight away, the orcs who are migrating across the land will have gone there. So I know that stuff that in a sense some of that stuff the players will never know, and some of it you need to make it somewhat interactive. So if the players know orcs are migrating and doing stuff, they're more likely to be more aggressive time-wise on those things.
I feel it is decent practice if you place a dungeon somewhere. It's kind of implied by the DMG that your party isn't going to be the only one raiding it, right?
There are other active
Gold
people.
Rush Fever, other actors, right? So that's fine. That doesn't mean that you have to immediately flood the region with rival adventuring parties or whatever. But that does. I think there's nothing wrong with creating this sense of like sort of like urgency in players where they understand that like if they're going to abort their delve and chill out for 7 weeks, then if they come back, there's no guarantee that this will still be accessible.
Or there may be changes to the environment. This is about dungeon design, to be clear, not campaign design, but it's part of the same principle. In fact, Warhammer Quest behind me, between the first and the second levels, there are notes in the sample DM adventure at the back, which I'm running with my son and my wife and our friend, and it's good fun. Quest is a really good game. But it's like, if the players go straight down into the second deep, then obviously nothing's changed. But if they come back, there are traps in the way. And that's the same principle, isn't it? That if the players use time in one way, they lose it in another. And that's not about fake tension or bullying your players into doing one thing or another, but you create a meaningful choice between the two.
And I think, it applies on a micro level, but like even on a campaign level, it should. Obviously, again, you don't want to make it too restrictive because I guess then you kind of get rid of the sandbox elements, right? That's maybe a way to keep players from just wandering aimlessly is that if you kind of like create all these timers and consequences, that they'll actually be forced to commit to actions.
Oh yeah, and yeah,
but
I'm not suggesting, except in extreme circumstances, it is used as a stick. What I mean is, if
yeah.
the sense that the world is moving and dynamic, and we've got some comments which will help us with this.
Well,
Sorry, you go for it.
one second with the commentary. There
Yeah,
was
yeah.
one other point when
Yes, yeah, please.
there's even Kevin Crawford, right? You're no doubt
Mhm.
familiar with his
Yeah, yeah.
sandbox games.
Mhm.
Are you, by the way?
Yeah, I have read them. I've not run them. I'm not an expert on
Okay.
them.
Well, so in his games, he provides basically a system so you have all these different factions, and you can even play
Yeah.
out, and these are, whatever, it's a space crime guild, a space mobster guild, or whatever.
Mm.
But so these organizations, they you can even do, like, every month you can roll and you can play out these sort of faction battles that slowly change the political landscape of the map, right?
Yeah.
And might have effects on the planet, right? Especially if the PCs are hostile or friendly with one of these factions. So you can create like sort of like a more dynamic campaign world that way. Yeah, that's what I was going to mention.
Yeah. E suggests that a static world is a prop closet. It's just there to just. It's kind of it's not real. It's kind of an excuse for, oh, I guess you could go and do this. It's essentially I'll put this costume on today, the kind of thing. Becca says, static or dynamic campaigns come down to a question of how robust is your world build. As PCs become moves and shakers, the dynamism should increase. Probably will if you keep building the world. And dynamism is going to be low, therefore, in new campaigns with low-level PCs, he suggests, and should be. The players are still becoming familiar with the setting, as is the DM. Here is a recognition. He's suggesting we recognize correctly, I think, this side of it is correct at least, that, look, this is a game, and if it's a new campaign setting, players need to be, you just need to be able to say, look, there are certain conventions to the game, and a convention to the game involves giving players a chance to bed in before you launch loads of stuff at them.
I think this is one of those cases where it's a convention, but you don't really have to work very hard to do it, right? Because they're also going to be guys of relatively low import. The problems that they'll tackle will not be very, very major, and maybe even the region that they'll be based in will not be the most exciting region in the world. But still very dangerous, some sort of backwater region.
Guys, we're based in Holland.
Yeah, exactly. Well, paradise, right? You don't. Well, I was going to say you don't have any random encounters here, but go to Rotterdam. But
guys, we're in Frisia. Is that more like it? We're in Frisia. This is the worst place. The worst place ever.
Man,
the best place.
I have half Frisian. I think be a little bit careful. But no,
isn't that a kind of cow?
It is. No, I think it is a Frisian. It's definitely not a type of cow. No. No, but what I was going to say
answers
is that,
in the comments.
The low level at lower levels, you should probably give the players some chance to settle in before you you pull the rug from under their shirt. Oh, sorry, under their feet. That's the proper expression.
Yeah. So I think this brings up, in terms of reactivity, a controversial example. What about the assassin in T1? And Joseph Block puts one in T0 as well. What about the idea of, like, should you have like a first or second level character assassinated as a result of them killing the bad guy boss in the low level dungeon? Or at least should there be a chance of being assassinated? And how far is that breaking the convention of giving them time to bed in? And how far is that having an actually reactive world, like a usefully reactive world?
I've definitely sent assassins after my players in my own games. I would
say
in real
life,
yeah. Also in real life, yeah, that's right. But this is again one where how you go about it would drastically alter my answer, right? It's going to depend on how much of a chance would the players have had to figure out that there's maybe going to be an assassin coming, or is it just going to be something that they'll learn the hard way by having one of their party killed, right? Most people are going to be okay with the idea that, like, oh, somebody is after you, but it's an assassin. You don't know where he's going to be coming from. Versus it's completely out of the blue. There's almost no way you could have seen this coming, and then bam, you get killed, right?
Yeah, I think that and certainly I feel like that's, let's say, it's a legitimate point of argument or disagreement in some ways. I see that people offer different arguments that make sense over that reactivity. Is, I guess, the argument for no, just boof, you take it, is, look, you did something, and you should know that, if you haven't learned the lesson, you've now learned the lesson. I think would be the argument, isn't it? Bad guys come after you, you have to start planning properly. And it kind of makes sense. I guess it depends on the experience of the players. Could I suggest that if this is like, as much as it pays in the OSR sometimes to be like a hard ass DM, at the same time, if this is like a bunch of 10-year-olds, your kids are playing AD&D for the first time or something, and you're like, the second session they defeat the bad guy, the third session you assassinate one of them and laugh and don't give any warning, probably is good to give them the sense of the convention before they suffer from it. They need to know what's likely to happen in the world before they suffer from it. If these guys are 55-year-olds who've been playing for 30 years, 40 years even, probably it's okay if you hit them hard.
Then they might be smart enough to go like, hey, wait a minute, we off this guy, right? But they didn't find the spies in the village that would have recognized them. So yes, then an assassin is going to be after them.
They've still suffered it from the consequence of their actual actions, but they will feel less confused and frustrated than someone who doesn't know why something's happened because they don't know the game.
Even if they don't see it coming, right? The guy might still fail a move silently check, and then you can have a knife fight with a guard in sleeping chamber or bed chamber. Right.
Oh yeah, and especially because you've got like second level characters versus seventh level assassin, it's going to be pretty unpleasant, probably.
For sure.
Yeah. So okay, so if we're talking about, it is preferable to have a non-static campaign. I think we've discussed and agreed, and we've kind of defined some of the ways in which that dynamism happens. But let's talk about busyness in the non-static campaign. You've touched on this, the idea that like every session they get back from the last thing that you force them to do, and then there's a new thing. This is John. If players are enjoying many sessions in a mega dungeon, how much other stuff should be happening in the background? In Blackmoor, Arneson didn't want his players to ignore everything but the dungeon, but they did. So he had the baddies take over town. I'm not sure that's a great example. Obviously, I don't think we're claiming it is, but like, how much should you? John then puts it, and this is not the right question. How much should you punish players being excited and focused in dungeons? He's joking, but how far should there? Like, is it that you should just tack towards what the players enjoy doing? Oh, they like the mega dungeon, so just do more of that. Who cares that this hook is hanging in the town? And how far should you ruin the game by, is that ruining the game or is that improving the game to force them to interact with the world outside?
I think, well, the way this was obviously phrased in the discussions was just in the most disingenuous, not in John's proposition, but just the discussion in the most disingenuous way possible. But the idea is that if you interfere with that, this is towards some sort of greater purpose, right? They're only in the dungeon. Should you just allow them to delve the dungeon, or should you be a caring, DM? Should you occasionally try to like pull them from their autistic gold mining simulator and say, guys, there's a whole world out there, and then they go, nah, and they go back in the
leave
dungeon.
me alone.
You need to try occasionally. Listen, if at some point you're like, okay, these guys, that cannot be helped. Listen, all right, you apes, level 9.
Yeah. So I think to frame it in a fruitful manner. I say Stephen does give the example here. You can always set up, if you're trying to teach people who don't know the conventions that things might happen. I think the idea that you're like, you arrive in town and an adventurer has just been killed in town for having attacked the cult. But the Lord is paying.
Guy has been killed. You find that a guy wearing more or less your clothing, or like sort of a similar description, has been
that too.
Yeah, that's a classic one, right? Or somebody, like if you're a thief, one of your old pickpocket comrades goes like, "Oh, you say bounty on your head," or whatever, right? Something. I did funny voices just now, by the way.
Exactly. Yeah, you're real DM. But no, exactly. I think the point is either at the offset, at the outset, like, oh, adventurers are being killed by the cult, or this is remember in the context of training players who are new to the conventions, what might happen. And that is not like, it's okay if players, I think for my Dark Sun game, I did sell it as like to a bunch of half the people, but most people knowing D&D quite well, but half them being Dark Souls players, being like, this is Dark Souls, you know, there's going to be a high body count, there's going to be a high iteration and a high skill level required. And the players accepted that. But of course, if players don't know the conventions going in, it's reasonable for them in social terms, because this is a game where you're with other human beings. It's reasonable to make sure they know those conventions.
I mean,
Yep, that's what we do random.
It's in the same way that probably if your adventure starts, you know, the PCs, the adventurers go into an inn, the innkeeper offers all of them a drink. They say okay, and it's just all poison. safe and
Okay, so I know you didn't enjoy our last campaign, Prince, the way I started it like that.
I'm gonna do that now in some adventure. It sounds so good.
No, do it in a game where you say this is highly story based, highly character backstory based. Please come up with like a 10-page backstory for me to draw.
Yeah, this was your ancient enemy.
Yeah. Well, man, you lost, didn't you?
Oh boy.
Yeah. Gus cringes at your voices. Hey, Gus, good to have you in the.
Give me a break. You'll love my voices.
And then Grutz says, yeah, you know, if you've got a problem with other people, if you can't be bothered to interact with them, you could just do. I think it's really interesting, without ever having played D&D, like the solo modules. Council of Worms consists of an adventure book with 4 adventures in the box set and 1 solo adventure.
Only one.
It's a one-to-one. It's duet, but obviously Dungeon did solo adventures, and there were solo adventures published. But it's something where I'm like, I don't think it's illegitimate. It's like doing a game book, right? Frankly, if at its best, it's going to be like playing fighting fantasy. But it's something where you're like, oh yeah, it's interesting that was so common because we didn't have the internet, but also that probably for some people that's better because they hate other people.
You know, it was sort of like a replacement for video games. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's one irreplaceable element of D&D, as in by that I kind of mean any proper RPG anyway. But like, you know, is that they are social experiences, and if you're a misanthrope and you find the problem is that other people aren't doing the thing you like, D&D is actually, for a game created by wargamers in the 70s in the Midwest, is a surprisingly multifaceted game. That's off topic, but just as an aside, it does involve that social dynamic of needing to know, you know, how people interact with each other.
Yeah, I would say so. As a misanthrope, I would agree. Yeah.
As somebody who likes playing, he's mostly played the X solo modules. That's mostly what he plays.
As someone who has played all of the Tunnels and Trolls solo adventures.
But yeah, he just bought a Cleric's Adventure. What's that series? Cleric's Adventure or Cleric's Fight or something? The set of modules like one cleric. Yeah. So logistics of prep.
Cleric.
Yeah.
Mission.
Yeah. Logistics of prep between sessions. Yeah. You do get story games which are like for one player, which consist of things like that, and you're like, so is this? Could you explain how this is a game? Like, by that I mean in the technical sense. I'm not saying insultingly. Actual story games, Forge-like story games, where you're like, where is the game in this? This is just like for one player. Why don't you roll some dice? And if you don't like the results, change them. Okay.
I guess that is and we do have to get back to the topic, but I would say with these story games, it's very often people are trying to extract the sort of narrative part, that
the end result of the role-playing game. They want it. That's all they want. Yeah.
It's normally created as the byproduct of just like an entirely organic form of gameplay, and they remove all the gameplay and you just extract that part and a sort of skeleton of mechanics that generate something, and then hopefully you feel the same. We're talking story games again, Doof. Sorry, buddy.
This is the story game channel. Logistics of prep between sessions. If you've got a huge world, player freedom, how do you determine the right things to prep? Do you have a between session caller? Do you just hyper prep? What's the, you know?
I would highly recommend trying to train your players to make a commitment on what they're going to do next session, in between sessions or the previous session. If you can get that done, then you can save yourself some effort.
Yeah, it's not a problem. I would say there's a degree of just being it's experience. I'm not blaming a new DM who
Yes.
struggles with this, but
Yes.
there's also a degree of just running with it. So I give the example of literally last night that the players were like, where they were in Ilafan, they'd just gone in. They're like, okay, we think we need to retreat, and not just retreat to camp, but like we just think we probably need some high level characters with us to get in here. And we've either got them training or they are off in a different place altogether, so we can't do that, you know. So they retreated, and I was like, oh, okay, you want to retreat? You're going to go down to the forest and camp? They're like, no, we're just going to like travel back to our home base. I was like, okay, fair enough. They then picked up a hook. They talked through the hooks, and they're like, all the stuff I had quite prepped. They're like, oh, we could do that, we could do that. And then they were like, oh, why don't we go and do this Rock Island
Find the
tower?
one thing that you have no idea. Yeah, exactly.
No, I thankfully had I thankfully had like the core idea, but I didn't have a bunch of room titles. I didn't even. It's a small dungeon. I didn't have a bunch of room titles. Like it's not like a massive environment. But I was like, I just have to prep this now. I know what I want to put in here. So while we took our break and while they were traveling, I was like just frantically writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fine. I've done that many times before. That's an experience thing. Like it's but I think it's preferable if, and I think the question involved the idea of the between session callers, or Doof says, you know, do you just ask them what they do before? And
exactly.
Yeah, the between session caller is one way of articulating that. Is if no one else picks, Bob picks.
Oh, by the way, yes, I've also EOTB mentions this. I've definitely done this when I ran my open B2 game on the Discord. Yeah, of course, right.
Yeah. So no, I agree.
I was
you can't just say, look, let me tell you, because you haven't decided, you really practically can do these things. If you say now, I want to do something else, you say no. One thing this is part of the social dynamic, is it is okay to admit, look, you don't want to like break the immersion, inverted commas, but the immersion is about the game, not about like everyone pretending they're actually elves. So you can just say
it's about running away from reality. That's what D&D is about.
But you get
so
get what I mean.
Bullied. Like you can't get bullied in D&D. Well, you know,
we'll
maybe
believe
in my game, but
but I think the idea that what you're meant to be, you know, it's that you can say, if something you as a DM can't give them infinite content, and if they're like, oh, can we just do this thing, you could be like, okay, well, that would take a while to do, or you can just admit like, okay, give me 10 minutes to do this. Or you can do as he says, no, this week these are your options. If you try to do something else, I just want you to do these things, because look, I haven't had time to prep for anything else. I think it's okay sometimes to do that, you know, and that's up to the players to give you warning.
Yeah, I definitely. There was one other thing you said about the experience, and it's something I run into when I use a lot of random wilderness encounters. Basically, that at some point while running Carcosa, I kind of had to learn to you kind of like have to instantly be able to spin, you know, yet another random encounter into something potentially interesting or intriguing, right? Eh, that's also something that does come with experience, but if you're a little bit gun shy, you could probably also just roll, I don't know, 20 or 30 random encounters in advance and just write them down and turn them into something interesting. So you always have something to fall back on.
Yeah, maybe that's one thing. Is
smart.
No, indeed. Yeah. Oh yeah. One thing about, in terms of prep, you can do quite efficient, short, relatively speaking, short prep via roll some layer like this. We already discussed this quite a long time ago in the stream, like an hour ago. But like, have a couple of layers prepared, have a couple of locations, and you know, just have the stuff that's there that you can slot in quickly, rather than being like, I don't know what to do anymore, and you're panicking because you don't have the time to prep or whatever. You can do that ahead of time, I think. Yeah. Okay. On that note, using random encounter tables in an ongoing campaign, is the entire world wilderness defined by the DMG tables? Here we're talking about the first edition DMG, or do you eventually narrow down encounters for a given region based on play? E.g., this road is plagued by orcs, ogres, and spiders based on previous roles. Do you keep adding? Is it better to let that help define the its character? So basically, how far do you just have like a DMG set of tables at the start and they don't change, or you only put in replacements, or how far do you characterize the world based on what's already happened on the random tables?
I usually I just use the tables in the book, and when in some cases, right, like when you get a very rare result, like a dragon or or a chimera or something, these tend to become, and this happens organically, basically, these tend to become regular features, right? Because if players encounter a dragon in its lair, they're going to remember that, because they might at some point, if usually the dragon is too strong for them, but at some later point they might decide, all right, it's time that that dragon gets what's coming to him. He might have a horde. So this will gradually flesh out the area in any case. As for I think it is probably you should definitely, if you see the need for it, you should definitely customize those tables to to your liking, to reflect the specific region that the players are adventuring in. With the caveat that usually there's a sort of like underlying balance to these random encounters and to this terrain type. So just keep it in mind. But probably you can alter it quite a bit before you make any blunders.
Yeah, I think now, of course, there's two types of customization. One is the World of Greyhawk type, where Gary provides great region-based tables. You get this in many campaign settings, of course, like Dark Sun MC2. In fact, I think the back of the Dark Sun campaign setting itself, but Dark Sun MC2 has a bunch of tables in it by terrain, for instance. So that's the customization, that you're not just using the original and the best. But I think there's also the idea of how far do you change, and obviously you say you're like, well, no, I think you're probably right initially. Let's say initially, mostly it's that you might abstract an encounter that happened, and that dragon exists, or you abstract when they encounter some orcs, anytime it's likely to be the orcs in the local area. So that's characterized by the local, like your region guide. I guess there's a question: what happens if an area changes over the course of the campaign? That is a slightly different question, isn't it?
Well, probably the random encounter tables should reflect what's happening in the region. I think that's the proper way to go about it. And definitely, if the players keep running into those orcs and they're really sick of them, and at some point they're like, okay, well, let's get rid of these bastards. Well, that's great. Then the DM, you get to figure out how to make an orc camp. And then afterwards, right, it maybe don't let it bother them so much.
Yeah, indeed.
Remove those.
And some of this is about the developing world, which is kind of what we're touching, and we're coming into at various points here. But the idea that politics changes, like what happens if there's a war between neighboring countries. This is very Greyhawkian as a question, by the way. I understand this is not actually going to be super true of lots of other settings, which are not quite so much of this. But the classic Greyhawk thing is boundaries are changing. The big Greyhawk update, the second edition Greyhawk, part of Carl Sargent's Greyhawk range, is the Greyhawk Wars have happened. What's happening afterward? The module he published, you can get it online. It was never printed. It was cancelled, but they did then put it up as a PDF. Ivid Undying is about like what's the aftermath of more wars in Greyhawk. It's very Greyhawkian. And in that case, you're going to have to change the patrols. You're going to have to change the kinds of monsters, whatever it is. But I think that's not going to happen quickly. I'd say that it's not going to happen. They're second level now. Everything's changed.
I would say that's like something that you can I think something that's as a result of like very large political events that probably really are only perceived or properly by the players by the time that they're well embedded within the world. Then it suddenly makes sense that when you say these two fantastic kingdoms, what is it, Furiondi and what is it, Gaunt, or
the Great Kingdom,
the Great Kingdom. These all go to war. Then because maybe they've interacted with these people, the Archduchy of Verberbonk or whatever. Right. Then it's more than just a name. Otherwise, it's like, okay, a bunch of random assholes are fighting, and I guess we count groups.
Let's I'll comment EB's comments, and I'll come back to that because there's a point there. Something DMs have to accept is running a sandbox game is more time intensive. Yes, I think there's an important point here that we're talking about a particular kind of campaign premised in the early editions of the game, and which we think is a very good way of running it, and which makes sense of lots of things that go on in the rules of the early editions of the game. But if you're like, oh no, but I don't really want to do that, then fair enough. It's just you're not going to be able to do it. You can't say I will I will cut down on my how much I develop the world and just kind of half-arse it. Basically, you can't do that. There is some degree of like, yeah, this takes time.
If you don't have, yeah, I would agree as well, in the sense that if you're not willing to commit to, having to work more and probably having a lot of material that will not get used by any particular group anytime soon, if you're not comfortable with that, then maybe consider, can be a little
different
bit
hobby.
more railroady. Maybe,
Yeah.
so
As
maybe
long as
say
you're
here is B2.
Yeah, maybe that's one thing, is you say to the players, one thing, you buy products, but also you say to the players, this is just what we're doing. And if they're like, oh, but I really want a sandbox, then just admit. I guess I'm happy to be snobby enough to say, I just think obviously it's better if you can exploit the whole shape and body of the rules and the game rather than just this part. But I think it's okay if you can get the time to do this part and you enjoy doing this part on a, it's a Friday lunchtime at work with your pals for an hour a week, and it's just like you do this. Yeah, I think that's great. Please do that.
People run tons of one shots or maybe a series of linked modules. Happens all the time. It's
but I suppose what
all right.
The snobby bit is, let's not all pretend that's exactly the same thing as like a sandbox campaign. Like, hey, they're all the same thing. You're like, well, no, it's okay. It's okay. We can all just do the thing we can do, that we're able to do. I think is reasonable. What I was going to say is, and this kind of comes up with touches on world building, but I think is also connected to this random encounter thing, and also about world events. Presumably, the world events, let's admit it, the world events are, unless you're using a timetable from a published product, which you can do, like they'll be like, oh, on this day this happens. If you're doing it yourself, you, the DM, are deciding when Fury Ondi and the Great Kingdom go to war, and you're doing this because it's fun. Like you're not there, like you're not doing it because you're like, oh, I think if you're like, honest, oh no, the stars have aligned.
If you're honest, you do these events a year in advance or something. You make it neutral. You don't have to. You can be more objective. Will that be the reality? Very often, no. Very often, the DM will decide. Okay.
Well, no, I'm not saying like, oh, you should. Yeah, I'm not saying the DM should. Yeah, I would say no. This is the question. I'm not actually saying should the DM just decide. Oh, I have a war. I do think yes. Seed them, decide them, have timetables. We're talking about this to do with the idea of, could missions have expiry timers on them based on obvious things that are going to stop them being relevant? I agree with that, but I'm saying there is a degree of like, how do you decide as a DM when to introduce not just a timer on a particular mission, the guy's been executed, or the raiders have got away, or whatever it is. That's a small scale one, but how do you decide when to have these big scale things? Even if you're planning in advance, let's assume you're doing that. Which I think is a good idea. How should you do that?
Well, so I think I said it before. There's one way where you just you decide it, way in advance. 3 years seems like a pretty good example, or pretty good timeline. You just make up a bunch of events. They'll go off when they go off. Too bad if you're in that region and you're adventuring. Whatever. Maybe the price of lamp oil is going to go up, or something like that. The other one
of lamp oil
would be to use some sort of system which is analogous to like something like Kevin Crawford's faction type of gameplay, where you have a way to abstract and model the behavior of these great factions, right?
Yeah.
So even though their behavior will not be predictable to you, there's still sort of like the point is you want to make it not arbitrary. But I guess the third one, you can also just go by like your personal judgment. If you decide like, listen, factors have been building up enough, it is war now, that's acceptable to me.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's obviously it's a light touch in that case, isn't it? You don't want to be like, I've decided because this comes into the example of
arbitrary.
Is it just that literally every time the players are doing anything else, you stop them doing it and they have to do an event because you've decided? It's no, there's a degree of like, re-ease thing about the FR grade box. It's 2 years, and you have like several events and rumors for each month, like 5 for each month or whatever it is. And then you have the year of the prince, and then you have like, the same for every month in that year. So I guess that's not a bad thing. Again, it's part of the, if you're wanting to And of course, you could say for your first campaign that's sandboxy, you don't do that. Fair enough. But let's say you're like, I would love to have that kind of world. Yeah, maybe that's a good idea. You write down a year ahead of, and that doesn't mean loads of stuff. It might just mean like one event per season, or it might mean whatever, whatever it is.
Yeah,
whatever
or
it
you
is.
make a random
Yeah.
table with a list
Yeah.
of events, with a
Yeah.
a probability. You don't want to have a world where you have an earthquake every month, right, or whatever.
Yeah.
But right, something like that. Yeah, that would work.
Yeah. So I think the principle there is attractive, and if people are thinking about call it verisimilitude, which I think is a word we've gone back and forth on in discussion, but which obviously means at some level that it is, and we talked about this a bit. We've talked about this a bit the last few session times as well. At some level, you are giving the players an enjoyable simulacrum and experience of the fantasy world. The fantasy world is not paper thin, and the players are just moving pieces in it or just playing your story. They are actually experiencing a world rather than everything else. And I think in that case, a good way of adding a bit of verisimilitude is to say once a quarter, or based on the random table, or based on my 2-year timeline in the game. And I haven't put loads of work into it. I haven't put like 40 hours of work into the timeline. I've worked smart, not hard. But there are things that will happen that the players will think, oh, we didn't make that happen. That is the world existing around us. Which I think that's like a very easy way to do that.
Right. And they might you kind of want to, this goes back to the reactive world. If they come up with some sort of crazy scheme to rob a caravan, and they do so in the livery of whatever a nearby of a rival duchy, there should at least be a little chance that like that kicks off a skirmish or something like that, right? Like
I think that he says eventually the events, this is if you've written or generated events, start to run themselves. You're just injecting new stuff into the ongoing aftershocks. And of course, at that point, it becomes easier because you've got more experience doing it to organically judge what to add, I suspect. Because you're like, oh, this seems like a natural consequence of this other thing.
All these tools that you can make in advance, they are like, again, they're the tools in order for you to get the job done. Your mind is the most powerful thing, for sure.
So we've touched on this, but what is the efficient application of time pressure so players need to use time wisely without wasting lots of prep, or instead of you de facto railroading them to one top priority crisis after another? I think wasting lots of prep there does not mean you've created stuff the players don't immediately play. I think it means you put stuff down and the players mess around and don't ever do stuff. We've kind of touched on this, and it's also, how do you not just railroad them? Like, you have to go to this. What are let's talk about efficient application of time pressures in the world so that players keep, the game is interesting. The players have to make good choices about how to spend their time.
I feel in an ideal scenario, they should be pretty self-motivated. They should want to explore, right? They should want to get
sounds good.
Get plenty of gold. When I was playing Axe, I always found the living cost mechanics were actually a pretty effective way to keep us to sort of align our behavior in a way that there had to be a certain efficiency to what we did, right? We couldn't just go randomly hex crawl or randomly explore for too much time, because at some point it would be payday and we all had like a bunch of henchmen and retainers and that sort of stuff. So part of it would have to be, we couldn't abort the run into the mega dungeon too early as well, because traveling
you had to get the money
from the and traveling to and from the town was quite it was
dangerous.
Dangerous, and it took a long time. So
I agree. I think that's right, is that some of it is inherent to the game. Some of it is not about campaign level prep. It's just, if you are running wildernesses right, and if you're running if you're hiring people, which you generally will be in AD&D, if you are charging living expenses, people will have, and also if you're charging training costs, people will have ample reason to adventure. And people will not be like, can I find an obscure thing that you haven't prepped? They're not going to be like trying to find a thing. They're going to be doing stuff that is there for them to do. I guess there's a natural dynamic there.
Yeah, I would say so. I think most players are
not
reasonably well motivated. You'll have a few have a few, what do you call the troublemakers that'll go like, oh, what if we go north? And that's fine. You should be able to handle that.
Warhammer Quest, similarly, just to give an example of what is plainly in there, because it's Hero Quest, Advanced Hero Quest, Warhammer Quest. So it's essentially the Milton Bradley Games Workshop spin-off of D&D in a board game, functionally.
Nice.
And it iterates. So Quest is good. I've got a review of it up on the channel. Go and have a look. It is the best new D&D like RPG of the 90s, I would say. It is a legitimate game. But there's some interesting stuff, like the living costs are quite small, often like 2 or 4 gold pieces per day per player, based on a kind of fairly high GP income. But you've also got to pay for training, and you've also got to buy stuff or potentially. And so money is you're never super rich. And so if you're like, oh, we'll just stay here for like 2 weeks, out for 3 weeks, just so that we can do everything that we might want to do.
Living costs.
It's going to start pressuring your money. Also, you have settlement events, which can be really bad. So they're very brutal with settlement events, which are randomly generated. So yeah, I think there's a few ways it uses of saying go back out to the adventure.
I think in 1E, living costs are what is it, 100 GP per level per character? That's quite a bit of money if you're at least that's what we did in Axe, and that's quite a bit once you're level 5 or 6. So that was enough. It's not going to immediately kick you push you into poverty, but you usually don't want that living cost to come by again. So right.
Yeah. No, I agree. So up to there's a couple of, I think, more or less I've just drawn out from this the discussion so far, which I think will take us out, give us our last 25 minutes or something, or 20 minutes of main conversation. But just drawing on originally JB saying, oh, the campaign is this thing that happens, not the world building or the DMing, the refereeing, but the interaction of players with these things. Yep, that's true.
Yes.
So what about, and we've touched on it a bit with questions about, how do you change random encounter tables? How do you model them? How do you do political events? But let's talk about just in general, how should, maybe let's platonically talk about it. What's fun? What's exciting? What do we want to see in terms of a game world being affected by players over the course of, months and years of in-game time?
Well, I think the nature of these sort of sandbox games also means that very often you will have, just to take these hexes with only like, what is it, a sentence of description or a paragraph or something. I feel a lot of elements in your world are going to be like that, where you have some details or some idea of its general nature, but it's really going to be up to the players very often, like how detailed these or significant these events in the game really are going to be, or these elements of the game. If your players end up interacting a lot with the church, right? Say they're doing they're trying to get a raised dead going, and maybe you've got some people that'll ask about their core beliefs, but like, let's say they don't do that, but they get somebody raised, and now they have to do a quest for that church. Then you suddenly have to start thinking like, okay, what does the church want, right? And I feel that just by it's kind of by what draws the player's attention, that's going to drive you to like refine and build out elements of the game.
Yeah.
Right.
So partly what we're saying is the players affecting the world is that the story of the world afterward is the stuff that matters, is the stuff they've focused on or explored or done.
Yes.
Yeah. And well, I guess this touches on what maybe we'll probably do within the next few episodes of this, but it touches on high level gaming as well. And I'm thinking about name level domain stuff. Like, what about the political makeup? The domains, players becoming players in the world, like political players, great magical researchers, whatever it is. How does that look in terms of in the authentic campaign? I guess let's just develop that thought a bit. Like, what does the world look like once the players have started doing that? As in, how far do you start bringing in, without touching on that, how far does that affect how you shape the campaign?
This is a difficult question for me to answer, right? Because my highest, my axe fighter got to level, what is it, 7 or 8, right? I was close to getting some. I was knighted, right? I had I think a crazy witch duchess as a patron. I didn't quite have a domain yet. right? And in
Yeah.
my games as well, I've never had domain games, so I don't really know how I would
Yeah.
like. I can give you a theoretical sort of approach to how I would handle it, but this is going to be. It's very likely that there'll be some. Because of the way domain play also isn't really like filled
Mm.
in any
Yeah.
type of game
In a
besides
D&D,
hacks.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say, besides BX, very sort of like bare bones.
Oh, I'd say
They know some ways to tackle it, but
Birthright does some of it via the
yeah.
Birthright system. If you're playing Birthright, it doesn't
Oh yeah.
necessarily fit for other systems. But yeah, Birthright does give you some systems that are kind of okay.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Right, Beck Me or something like that, CM
Yeah.
CM series. There's ways to go about it, right? They give you enough
Mm.
to sort of like reverse engineer a format that works for a while. But how
Yeah.
this is going to look, I don't know.
Yeah. I guess this
How
is there'll
far
be a
did you get? I should probably actually ask.
Yeah.
How far did you have your?
I've got players in my big game with domains, and yeah, I think what's happened there so far, and this is partly as an amateur, this is just the confession of like, oh, I haven't done this lots, but I've done it a bit. What the main way I've done that so far is to develop, like, initially I was like, okay, so what, and this is actually, I know that one of the forbidden names, but this is actually a really good, nice point that Matt Colville once made about the idea of like, once you have the domain or the stronghold, you fight for it, like, as in you have to prove your title to the land. And I like that idea. And so basically I'm like, okay, so what's going to happen is, when you start to be a player in an area, and that particularly in the context of a stronghold, then people start to react. And so in the cases I'm thinking about, in one case it was that an intelligent undead decided to start interfering and messing around, was like a threat in the area who was interfering with the control of the land. In another case, there is a rival power. It's actually Baldur's Gate's colonial like company who are like, oh yeah, we don't want you to try to take over stuff here because we want to control travel. So they're starting to send like false flag mercenaries against the stronghold. So in one case, they hunted down the undead. In the other case, they're like, okay, we're going to hire like just a small, like a squad of mercenaries, not like a company, just we'll hire another 10 mercenaries plus some of our henchmen. And we're, just to up the guard. And then when we're back from doing a quest, we'll go and proactively deal with it. And we'll see how that resolves, right? But that
does feel like something where you would very quickly start building out like the a lot of different properties of like, especially like the rival baronies, the powers around you. They would very quickly get you would need to know not just like who's in charge there, okay, but like how many does he have a wizard, how many soldiers does he have, like all this stuff, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, because suddenly it matters. And it's okay. Let's say that though it's helpful if you have some of that information, it's probably okay if when you write your world building, you do your world building or you buy the product, it doesn't have detailed OOBs for every power. But once you're even in the mid levels, not even at high level, you're going to start being like, oh, it matters more. And especially at high level, you're going to have that detail. So some of that is the emergent development of a game. He does say his view is, it's the same principle as the DM deciding how a party changes a dungeon, except on a larger scale. It's not all that. So we've talked about this before in the dungeon episode we did. So the idea there was, okay, the party has killed loads of stuff. Let's say, what about restocking? What about political dynamics within a multi-faction dungeon? Things like that. And he is suggesting, at first glance at least, you just extrapolate that principle. And I think this, by the way, we've talked about this already a bit. But I think one way to solve the problem of being like, oh, the dungeon is an obvious environment with set rules, but as soon as you get out of the dungeon, particularly when you think about the level of the campaign, oh, it's just all a completely different game. And so you need actually, there's a good argument for the idea that it's a unified design principle. Like what I mean is it helps to see the similar design principles between the campaign and the dungeon rather than seeing their difference. There are differences, but it's helpful to see their similarities.
Well, it's obviously not a completely different game. I agree with that. But what I'm trying to get at is that I can figure something out, right? Like what you just said, like, okay, you would have, well, first of all, you would have to, pacify your hex. You have to build your strongholds. I think that's reasonably well described. Then after that point, well, again, as we have just discussed, you could have a timeline or a random event table that would screw with your domain periodically, and you could detail the neighbors and decide like if maybe they would they would have some ambitions, or they could be allied with that sort of stuff. So in a way, it would be an extension, but the rhythm basically of these sorts of moves and the nature of it would make it, in my mind, significantly different from both wilderness and dungeon crawling. That's why I say
sure, but
I don't
I
quite
think,
know how I would go about it. I'm sure I could do it, but I'm not sure
I
how
think
it.
the point is the mechanics may be different. An example, by the way, of an obvious. This is a trivial mechanical difference, but I think it's a relevant comparison. Okay, you're in the wilderness. You use this is using the 1E DMG. Use a D10, a D12, or a D20, depending on how patrolled it is, and you have 6 time slots per day, and you roll a number of times depending on the terrain you're in.
Sure.
Whereas in the dungeon, the classic is either every turn or every other turn, you roll 10 minutes,
1 in
you roll
6.
1d6, and it's a 1 in 6 chance, depending on the dungeon. And those are obviously used, but they are the same design principle, but with different mechanical outworkings. And I guess I'm attracted to the idea that you could at some level map what, like the design principles of the dungeon, like Mandelbrot style, they fractal out. Maybe that's not right, but I think there's probably some truth to it. As I think about it. And I think you say about time, I think time is a relevant factor. And birthright, I think it's seasonal. Every 3 months, you can go on it. Basically, each 3 months, you decide domain actions, and it may be that you go on an adventure with other PCs, or it may be that you spend time as the domain holder doing something or whatever. But the assumption is that that's kind of the dynamic is over a period of months, random events happen to you. You pick domain actions you don't have anything to do with, and then you do domain actions yourself. You go on a diplomatic mission, you go on a dungeon crawl, you go fight a war, whatever it is.
That does sound pretty rad. I'm just the only one I'm reminded of is so the CM series, I think, for BECME.
Companion Master.
Yes,
Is
that's
that it?
the ones. Yeah, that's right. So you did have an adventure called the Test of the Warlords, which was really a sort of outline for a campaign, and you were basically given new domains in essentially unsettled land, right? And there would be a timeline of like 2 years with certain events taking place in various at various times. So in between, you would be free to explore, dungeon crawl, maybe make allies, that sort of stuff. But then say you would have a frost giant invasion that you would want to stop, right? To sort of like mess with you. So that's one way of going about it.
Maybe not. Yeah, I ally with the frost giants. It's the great riff about Reiner Knizia's Lord of the Rings board game, which is a really good co-op game, quite Euro game, quite like technical, well, not technical, mechanical, but like also thematic. Is that there's always a point where a player says, "I want to play Sauron. I'm Sauron now because you're losing so bad."
All right.
They eventually then release a Sauron expansion naturally, where one player was Sauron,
totally ruining the game.
Naturally, But there's that thing, But no, exactly. I think the idea that's another system. E does mention, obviously, Doof and E have said, if you've seen in the comments, I put them up on screen. There are some procedures for domain encounters and
for sure
moving in.
I was aware.
Or an OA by Gary Gygax, Francois Frodoval, or Zeb Cook. The eternal question. It's not by Gary. That's the answer. Gary wrote down some ideas on the back of a piece of paper and gave it to them. And stole Frodoval's ideas, I think, is the general story of OA, isn't it? But yeah, OA has tables you could use to mess with player domains. So yeah, that is one example you could turn to, is OA. OA, weirdly,
I'll
is
have
this
to
thing
get
where it's
into OA at some point.
Yeah, I run my Christmas special for my big game, which is my big game is like a weird. I call it old 5R sometimes, like as in it started as 5th edition, but with an altered XP system that's gradually mutated more and more. So essentially everything DM facing is not 5th edition. I will not deal with it. I refuse. But OA is what I run for my Christmas specials with them, AD&D oriented adventures with some slightly altered XP rules. But yeah.
The adventures in OA in Dungeon were always pretty fun. in a way.
Yeah,
They had that sort of like mythological vibe to it, but that's the only thing I know about it.
I've read several of them. I've run one of them in that game was because it was on the hex map, which was Kappa of Patchy Bridge, which was great fun.
Oh yeah, I actually know that one. Yep.
Yeah, that's good. It's a setting I really like, and I mean we've run the equivalent of like 7 sessions. We'll be running it again this year. Okay, final kind of topic. Actually, we can pick up anything we haven't picked up. Any more questions in the chat as well, obviously. But this is again sort of a hypothetical in a sense. Not quite for me, as in I'll mention what I mean, but like it's something I'm thinking about Gary's experience and somewhat about and Anthony Husso's experience and I guess that guy who runs the game D&D, which is a complex subject, but obviously very awesome that he's played for so long. You're like, oh, what happens when you've played a game beyond the, let's call it not necessarily beyond the lifespan of a particular game, but like you've run it beyond the lifespan of characters, like it is now the case that you are generationally fully moved on. Then let's talk about the next campaign in the game, like just, and I've done this a tiny bit with the fact I have multiple games running in the same world and they do interact a bit. And I'm hoping to run a big crossover mega game next year. Is my current thoughts on that. But let's talk about that next campaign in the game and how the world continues to have pop and sort of develops over the course of decades of in-game time.
I guess the second campaign would be a way for you to, change it up a bit. Maybe they don't start in some backwater village that inexplicably has a mega dungeon. Maybe this time they're gonna go to...
Every backwater village has a mega dungeon.
Exactly. Maybe this time they're gonna start in whatever Baldur's Gate. Maybe you run a city game this time, or you switch it up a little bit. It, on the other hand, I mean, your players probably, if they're just perfectly happy picking up where they left off. I guess they got TPK'd in an inn somewhere after drinking poison.
In session 1. The second campaign, session 2, yeah.
But you just start them in some other area, right, that they haven't really been to, that might have some secrets left that you consider unexplored, and give you sort of a chance to, to introduce them to stuff that they haven't had a chance to experience.
So some of it is you get to enjoy the DM getting his bit out of it without becoming a novelist. You've got other ideas, the players can now play them. You often, as long as the players want to. He makes the general high level point. Obviously, this isn't a detailed piece of advice, but as a high level, players and characters don't make the world live or die. So there's obviously a principle of the world has to have its own internal life to make that work, because otherwise it will die when the players go.
You start this time. You start in Flurkle Land, which is an island, and there's only children there and talking animals. So you're these species. You have to play children. You don't really level up either.
It will take. It's one time. You have to wait 10 years to get to your age category.
Right. You can only level up if you make friends with all the animals.
One time. True. What? Hey, that's Ryotama, I think. One time extrapolated to age categories. Of course, you realize how idiotic is this unless you're assuming it's only ever magical aging. You're like, no, it's just the characters will age over time, right, in the game. Because
I think you could actually fall back and just invoke magical aging as a perfectly valid defense for the fact that you're probably not going to play characters that die of old age otherwise, if there wasn't like magic aging in the game. So I think they got you beat there.
Have they? I'm not sure about old age, as in dying of old age, but I think the particular point of can a game, and this is something where I'm stacking the deck because I'm obviously right, as in it's provably the case, just like sandboxes provably exist. Obviously, what actually happens is there are many games where people have been playing for decades and their with the same characters, and those characters retired or moved on, or like they're now high level characters.
For sure.
So it does happen. I think it's fair to say just because the game is 50 years old, there have not been 49 years old in terms of the actual published game.
It's not that the characters are also 50 years older. No, probably there's something else. That's true.
It's very rarely the case that's what's happened, but nonetheless, there's a thing there that's a cool thing in the game if you have that generational thing. My own experience of like the multiple games, both let's say, both stables within the same game over in-game time and groups within the same world, because that is the thing I can actually speak to, even if I can't speak to having run a 40-year game. I have got a 5-year game in the same world with
That's
multiple
not
stables,
bad.
and I have other games within that, of which one is 2 years old, actually, just turning 2 years old next month. And yeah, so yeah, there's some experience of like, and actually my Greyhawk game is 4 years old or something, though that has been stop-start at different points. It's quite regular now. But yeah, with the Realms games, this within the stable, within the kind of big game, to be fair, people have stables in all my games, but the long-running game, you're now at the point where some people are on their 6th or 7th character of a stable, usually of 3 or 4, because characters die, characters retire, because they, I think sometimes players are like, okay, this character's just going to do this, or they're going to settle down to do this. It's that I see less.
Yeah, they're
value in
just
them
done with
adventuring.
them. They're
Yeah.
like, all right,
Yeah.
bring them out
To
to
some degree.
pasture.
Yeah. And I think what we can see happening at the phase of the game we're in, where we've got people hitting high levels and high mid levels, because both it's kind of relevant there too, because at high mid levels you start getting people being like, oh, we're just going to go halfway across the world to do something completely different, whereas they don't do that at third level. Is that they are, you start recruiting PCs from new areas, you start having political entanglements in new areas. No one's got a stronghold out of the starting region yet, but I think that's going to happen. People are going to start having strongholds outside of the starting region as they are the right level for it, as they have the money for it. And so I think, and you can see they're starting to get kind of interest. They're going onto the plains. So, and obviously some players really love the idea of having characters on the plains. And so naturally, you organically
and how
develop
can
some
they
of that.
go onto the plains when
The plains
are not
aren't
real? Exactly.
It's useful to know
they glitch. They fall through the map. They disappear.
No one QA'd this. But yeah, the planes are not real. But the idea that you can see that players have, like, one of the ways in which I think the campaign develops generationally is that it happens with the same set of players. The same set of players kind of picking up new lower level characters. They've got like 9th, 10th level characters, and they've got 1st level characters in the same area. And you can see they're going to do different things. And occasionally the lower level characters may even buddy up, if you allow that, as henchmen to their high level characters. Sometimes it may be that they are on different missions, and I certainly see that too. But I think that naturally happens. The other way is obviously you have different games in the same world. And in that case, that is much more like and in some, so for instance, my Daggerford game shares a couple of players with my big game, and my streaming games share a couple of players with my big game, but also with each other and also with another game as well. Like, they're a big crossover of players I've got from different places. So they're different mixes, and that's an excuse to use the different content that I've developed for different regions. So that is my experience. I know that's long-winded, but it seems worthwhile to say. I haven't had the 20-year game, but I have got enough experience, hopefully, to say that's why I've done it.
I
in
would
few
say
situations.
far more than I have. I'm still on what do you call it? I've got my player group and I've got my world. One player group, one world, baby. Hoorah. Yeah, that's how I usually roll.
Pope, listen back and tell us what you think. Doof says he's going to check out OA. OA, to say it's been ruined by Cook, I think is an exaggeration by E, but I think it has many Cookisms for good and for bad. OA1 Swords of the Daimyo, the module that really is kind of like you need to have with the book to have a full setting, is a really good module, a really fun module, really interesting. Doof also says, what do you guys think? I have not read Heroic Legendarium. I'm sorry. I know it is very well rated. Prince.
I have checked out parts of Heroic Legendarium, but not the domain rules. So
any comments? Any comments in the? Yeah. Okay. Any comments in the comments about Heroic Legendarium and other domain rules? I'm trying to think of other domain rules. I've not. I said this. I've read Axe 1. I read Axe 1 several years. So Adventure Conqueror King system. Axe 2 is coming out via Kickstarter. Prince likes it. We have many friends of the show who like it. So, I read it years ago. I don't have strong opinions because I don't remember it. It's not. I didn't play it, so I didn't have the concrete learning of actually playing something.
Axe has I think the most legitimate or like serious domain rules next to AD&D in the entire OSR.
E says Heroic Legendarium is better than OA for the kind of like, here's the domain facing stuff. Yeah, I think Axe does a lot of everything, doesn't it? Hence the meme. Axe really does this. Yeah, it does a lot of things that are not heavily covered. I think here's one thing, and this is a topic for the high level. Obviously, one thing is Gary assumes that some of this stuff is going to happen organically, develop at the table. There's not as many detailed systems for it, basically. I think that's one thing that's true about that. Whereas Axe is like, no, here's the systems. Here's loads of systems.
Yes, Axe gives you a fully comprehensive system to cover all of it. Yeah, for sure. With AD&D, you gotta piece it together a little bit more. Probably by the time you get there, it's probably not a problem.
I think that's the point. I've argued that before, and I think it's true. That's not an excuse for Gary not completing rules. I think it is a thing where you can tell part of it is disorganized, and part of it is, like you're going to understand what to do once you've actually played the amount of game to get there. Whereas sometimes what we can do is we demand. It's the classic. It's the same thing with level limits, where people are like, I hate level limits for demi-humans. Oh, have you ever hit a level limit? No, because I don't play them, and I've never played a high enough level game outside of half orcs who are cleric, cap at clerics at 4th level. I've never played a game.
Right.
You're like, okay, great. I'm glad. Thanks for your opinion on this thing you do not know anything about. It's obviously not valuable, is it, to take that kind of criticism? Gary, to some degree, just knows you'll understand it as you play the game, if you play the game he presents, I think.
Yeah, I would say so. It's just more, usually it's, I feel a lot of these discussions are kind of like, in a way, they're like fake. Something bothers people in a sort of vague conceptual way, so they get rid of it, but they don't. They've never really actually.
It's Chesterton's fence. There's no understanding of what the thing is or why it's there or what it would do. Yeah. Let's finish up because we normally finish about 2 hours 25 minutes. Literally all 3 episodes are around there. Let's finish up with recommendation. Any extra recommendations on campaign boxes? I'll actually just I'll pick this up just before we go there. Perhaps domain systems. So Becca, we'll do a high level. Do you think that's part of the high level play discussion, or do you think it is its own discussion?
Separate, in my opinion, very much so.
Different episode. Then we can put that on the episode list. We do have like 3 or 4. We've got 3 or 4 more titles for episodes, I think, in the chat, haven't we? So
we should make that. Yeah.
Yeah, we have plenty of
recommendations
for campaign box sets, campaign booklets, whatever it is, stuff that can sustain people from either 1st to 10th or 1st to 20th, whatever, depending on the system.
I would say if you want to dive in head first, actually, do the, go full on sandbox in its rawest, purest form, Wildlands of high fantasy, and coupled with City State of the Invincible Overlord.
Yep, and I guess some of the supplements as well.
There you go.
And some of the supplements as well, because there's some
get all these. Yeah, for sure. Get all
JG
all 10 wilderness. Get all 10 wilderness. For sure.
Yeah, get the maps, get the relevant JG supplements, like supplement K, J, H. I think those ones, for instance, have some locations. Some of them do anyway. That's a good one. I've mentioned FR Grey Box, FR Bluey Box. The 2nd edition is not terrible, but it's worse. It has some things that are stronger, but it's a classic issue of that kind of declension. World of Greyhawk box set. I mentioned it Aurelion by Gabor.
Yeah, you should specify that Forgotten Realms 1E is not lame.
Yeah. So I let's say this is something, because we talked about it today. The Grey Box plus maybe a book called Forgotten Realms Adventures, and then the FRN group, FR1 to 16. Not all of those are good, but there are. If you want a genuinely quite good setting, and there's a couple of modules from the same time as well. You've got like a really good vanilla fantasy with a twist setting that is well worth reading and has lots of good gameable material and is written to be played. Go for that. Forgotten Realms early on is very good, and for all kinds of reasons it declines. I mean, the main stuff just being around needing to produce more content. Greyhawk suffers less from it, because what happens with Greyhawk is you have the TSR high tide of like all these modules and the box set, and then it kind of disappears off, and there's a couple of crappy modules and there's a couple of okay modules, and then you get Carl Sargent writing a really pretty good line of products, which are not all amazing, but are all functional. Like they all actually are things you can use in a game, like City of Greyhawk, From the Ashes, Ivid the Undying, Night Below, which I actually have here. Night Below was written for Greyhawk and published
by Carl
without
Sargent. I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, Carl Sargent. Yeah, that I'm talking about the Greyhawk line by Carl Sargent, the second edition
Oh, yeah,
Greyhawk stuff.
yeah. Of course.
Greyhawk suffers less from bloat because it's either early TSR. There's a brief amount of crap in kind of late 80s TSR. Then there is this kind of like this flowering where only Carl Sargent is writing for it, basically. So yeah, that Greyhawk is mostly good for that, obviously. Yeah, anything else? I've got 2 non-D&D recommendations just to be quirky, but do you have anything else?
Well,
Carcosa,
on the one hand, I love
Isn't-
Carcosa, yes,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, this comes with a couple of asterisks.
Yeah,
I would say the first one is just that it's not a kid-friendly setting, and I use that in the broadest sense. So it's
if
a
Prudence
little.
is saying it's not kid friendly,
I would say that even for a Dutch child, maybe.
yeah.
So it's very strange in that sense too. It's just a sort of like bizarre Lovecraftian sword and planet style setting, very horrific. The other caveat is that it was created using along similar lines as Wilderness of High Fantasy, actually. So it works quite well, but the rules are it's kind of shitty. This was something like I fell in love with it while playing it, so I kind of like made it work and expanded it and added stuff from other areas, modified the classes, and by the end we had something that was quite enjoyable. But
out of the box, it's not an incredibly strong product. It's a good product, but it's
it was very strange, running it out of the box.
Yeah.
So
no, I've had that experience.
Adventure.
It is partly that some products you pick up and either they're not super complete up front, and I think about Through Alton's Door, Ben Lawrence's Wishery is like that, where you're like, okay, you don't have loads of stuff and you can mine it off the blog, but you got to add to it. In other cases, you have stuff where it's an adventure for a setting without a system, and you're like, or as in it's D&D, but it doesn't have world systems, and you're like, okay. So Slumbering Ursine Dunes, it was obviously book 4 where he finally added a hex crawl and encounter tables. And okay, that's good, but it is something where I have I'd run a bunch of stuff in that world before then, and I'm like, okay, this would have been really helpful. So yeah, there is a degree of completeness which is helpful in recommending these products, isn't it? Like when you're like, this is a good product, you partly mean you don't have to spend extra millions of years doing the world building or systems building to make it work. That makes sense. Any more recommendations? Then I'll give my 2 and we'll finish.
Let's see. You know what? Let's leave it at this. I think this is decent. People can play 20 years. Right?
Yeah, put any recs in the chat if you want. Outside of D&D, 2 of the ones I've enjoyed most. I'm not sure if that's like it's a completely reliable guide, but it's not the worst. And by that campaign, I don't just mean a set of adventures. I mean like a world and setting is Star Wars: Lords of the Expanse, which includes a couple of both the box set, and then there are like 2 expansions which I have in this box set: the Player's Guide and the Instant Adventures. And though it's still slightly trad gamey because there's kind of a degree of like, oh, I guess there might be a bunch of adventures you have to make your players do. There's also like a timeline. It's a really detailed setting of a part of the Empire that is semi-independent during the Rebel Alliance period. There's a timeline for stuff that happens. There's loads of politics. There's loads of like, oh, this is how you could run a rebel campaign with them developing a cell. These would be the challenges. You could do this, and it has adventures too. And you're like, okay, it's not perfect, and it still somewhat assumes sometimes you've got to force players to do what you like them to do. But it's very close to being it has so many opportunities that you could run a sandbox in it. Basically, is the thing.
Owen.
Yeah.
First of all, that was pretty cool. I'll have to maybe check that out. But I did come up with actually one last recommendation.
One last one.
This is it's Broken Castle by G.
Oh yes.
But I warn you again.
This is like 8 asterisks. This isn't 2 asterisks. This is like 8 asterisks. I agree, but like,
you have to be strong enough. Your DMing hand has to be an iron fist in order to handle its power.
I think you have to have imbibed the deep mysteries.
Yes, that's if you are not fluent in Uridish, right? This is
I've just finished Snow Crash, so I'm up on that reference.
Right. Yes.
But exactly. You have to really know what you're talking about. Partly because of the weird system stuff that he's done, but also partly because you're like, this man is insane. Broken Castle it's a book plus a free PDF, and he's putting out another book fairly soon, I think, but where basically it's just his campaign in a book with loads of locations, loads of big, like in the main book, there's several big dungeons and some small dungeons. And you kind of need to like be able to tame the wilderness of this book for as various problems with it. But yeah, you could definitely just run an entire campaign from the DMG plus that book.
It has everything. Yeah, it
Yeah,
has
yeah.
towns, fucking lists of shopkeepers, dungeons, factions. You
And
name
if
it,
our
it's in
friends who
there.
play Axe, you'll love it because there is like it's sub-Homletian. It's like infra-Homletian detail on what stuff is worth. This guy loves it. He should have played
It has
Axe. Someone
tiles you can steal.
imagine.
Maybe
Can we get Gene
fence
to play Axe?
posts. Yeah. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, indeed. He'll just assume it's
And
another strange plot by Lorraine and
basically-
Skip.
Right, and Gene Weagle was afraid of getting sued, so he essentially, it's like he encrypted his book, so all
Yeah.
the stats have different names, so that you
Yeah.
have to piece that together. But it's not that hard. You
It's
can
like
make it.
glossolalia.
There's a three-handed sword in there.
Yeah. He says if you ask
Yeah, he
Gene
will
to play
kill
Axe,
you.
you get a flash.
Strike you down.
My
He will
my
rend
final
you
wreck then.
asunder. Yeah.
The Traveller Adventure. I say this is very much the kind of like speculative, but knowing how I play games, I've done a bit of stuff with Traveller, but basically, yeah, it kind of says, look, there's a bunch of stuff that can happen, including timed events, including X and Y. It does sort of say, oh, maybe you get the players to do it this way. You can ignore that advice. It is a whole campaign in a massive sector of space with organic events happening, and also you can just go and do your own stuff, and you can like take up jobs for side patrons, etc. You're like, okay, this is actually a serious thing, isn't it? This is like some of the nearest stuff to D&D beyond D&D.
Traveller is legit. Absolutely.
Yeah. And yeah, so yeah, I only have the Traveller book, which is the kind of I think many people think the best compiled version of the rules in PDF, because I'm going to get it on print on demand. But I'd much rather get the matching like 80s softback or whatever, because I'm not actually a hardcore collector, but occasionally I get very spurgy about that kind of stuff. You know, like I want that one, but I might just have to settle for the crappy print on demand. But
Indeed.
yeah, cool.
Nope.
Okay, there we go. I think we've covered everything anyone could ever want to know about running campaigns in classic AD&D or classic D&D. So we'll leave it there. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and in a month's time, 3 or 4 weeks time, we'll cover something. I think let's
high level gaming. I hope.
If you want to do, yeah, if you want to do high level gaming, we'll do high level gaming. Yeah,
Slith Hive will hopefully be out then. I think so. I think I can.
I will literally get the list of topics up so that we know what they are. Deep diving a module. That's not a bad idea. So yeah, there's a couple there. Deep diving into a module, doing high level play, if you like that. Okay, any more ideas, put in the comments. Any other thoughts, put in the comments. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Say bye, Prince. Bye, Prince.